Hey everyone, per your requests, I'm starting Sword of Coming. My channel isn't monetized, so if you're able to, please support me on PayPal to help me stay active. Chapters 281 through 290 of the previous episode. During a fierce battle at a haunted estate, Chun Ping'an stands ready to assist his friends using his concealed flying swords. Deeply moved by the tragic romance of the estate's ghostly owners, he secretly stamps a map with divine seals, which miraculously purifies the region's sinister energy. Later, while attending a magical performance in Blusher Prefecture, Chen's sharp instincts lead him away from the festivities. He unexpectedly reunites with his childhood nemesis, Ma Kuxuan. Now a ruthless fifth-tier cultivator, Ma casually boasts of his murders, setting the stage for a brutal rematch. Thank you. Now, let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. After entering True Martial Mountain, Ma Kuxuan had promised himself that he would never lose against opponents at the same cultivation level as him, regardless of whether they were chi refiners or pure martial artists. This was the case at the lower 5 tiers, and this would remain the case when he advanced to the middle 5 tiers and upper 5 tiers. Because of this, Chun Ping'an was a small knot in his heart. This kind of small knot was nothing for Miltarian cultivators, but it was still very repulsive. Ma Kuxuan was naturally unhappy about this. He was undefeated in True Martial Mountain where many immortals resided, yet he had actually lost to this hillbilly who only knew some bastard fist techniques back then. Since we've come across each other again, are we going to have another fight? Chun Ping'an asked. Ma Kuxuan rubbed his hands together and chuckled. Don't worry, I won't bully you, and we can have a battle at the 3rd tier. Seeing that we share a hometown, I'll also do my best to avoid killing you by accident. Even if you're wounded or crippled tonight, you'll still be able to feel proud about your victory against me in the Immortal Tomb when I advance to the upper 5 tiers in the future. However, let me warn you first. You can feel smug about this in private, but if you dare to tell others about it, then I won't go easy on you anymore. Ma Kuxuan peered down at the calm and unfazed Chun Ping'an, and a hint of displeasure appeared in his mind. Oh, you've even learned how to feign composure now. By the looks of it, you have indeed learned some things after walking all the way to Colorful Garment Nation. The amused smile remained on Ma Kuxuan's face, and he told himself that this little brat would understand the immensity of heaven and earth after he defeated him with a few punches in a while. Ma Kuxuan was just about to jump down from the courtyard wall, yet Chun Ping'an had already said, "We'll fight outside." Ma Kuxuan had been squatting on the courtyard wall the entire time, and after leaning backward, he vanished without a trace. It was as if he had fallen onto the street outside the residence. Chun Ping'an looked around before tapping a foot and leaping onto the courtyard wall. Ma Kuxuan was slowly walking along a deserted street, and he bent a finger and beckoned Chun Ping'an over. After Chun Ping'an landed on the street, Ma Kuxuan held one hand behind his back and used his other hand to scratch his head. Then, he took a glance at Chun Ping'an's sword case and smiled widely. You can use whatever weapon you want. I won't consider this as you taking advantage. Chun Ping'an didn't say anything, and he slowly walked forward after assuming the 6-step walking meditation stance of the mountain-shaking fist. Deep water naturally made no sound. The same principle could be applied to the fist intent of martial artists. By internalizing and concealing one's aura, and by returning to a state of natural simplicity, one's fist intent could thus become absolute reason. Even though Ma Kuxuan continued to denigrate Chun Ping'an, and continued to treat him as a pitiful fool, his aura immediately changed when he calmed his mind down and prepared to fight his opponent. He clenched one hand into a fist and held it against his abdomen, and he kept his other hand open and held it behind his back. When he formed a fist, he habitually had his fingers lightly dig into his palm. There was a gap of a dozen or so meters between them. Having fist intent alone isn't enough. You're far too slow. Ma Kuxuan suddenly strode forward, causing the ground to shudder slightly when his foot made contact with it. The force of his stomp traveled deep into the earth, yet it showed no signs of dissipating into the surroundings. The young boy in black arrived before Chun Ping'an in a flash, and he immediately used his right hand to throw a punch at his opponent's head. Chun Ping'an raised both hands at once, and he tilted his head slightly as he used his left hand to swat away Ma Kuxuan's punch. At the same time, he used his other hand to grab Ma Kuxuan's sneaky cross hook. He leaned forward slightly, and he used his left elbow to strike Ma Kuxuan's face. However, Ma Kuxuan unexpectedly raised his knee and furiously launched a front kick to block Chun Ping'an's advance. He leaned back, retreated one step, and successfully increased the distance between them, dodging Chun Ping'an's elbow strike. He was just about to unleash another explosive attack. After all, His front kick was powerful enough to completely shatter the target's internal organs. While traveling around and challenging grandmasters from all over, even fifth-tier martial artists had seldom been able to avoid vomiting a few ounces of blood after being struck by Ma Kuxuan's punches or kicks. Even though Ma Kuxuan was a military cultivator, his physique was surprisingly better tempered than that of most pure martial artists. However, Ma Kuxuan failed to strike Qin Pinyin, and he discovered that his opponent had grabbed onto his leg and thrown him sideways. Ma Kuxuan rapidly adjusted his posture in midair, and he eventually thrust his feet into the wall. His body was surprisingly parallel with the ground, and he maintained this strange posture as he walked forward as if he were walking on flat ground. Qin Pinyin walked beside him, and he threw a punch after the other at Ma Kuxuan's head. He didn't use the fist techniques that Cui Chan's grandfather had taught him in the bamboo building. This was a probing exchange, as both sides were unaware of their opponent's true strength. Thus, they held back and continued to accumulate power, and this first exchange was merely an act of observing their opponent's ability. They didn't use their full strength, and they didn't engage in furious exchanges straight away. It wasn't strange for Qin Pinyin to be so cautious, but it was very interesting that Ma Kuxuan, someone who had seen many things in true martial mountain and fought against many grandmasters in the cultivation world, was also so careful. It was clear that in the depths of Ma Kuxuan's heart, he still felt a sense of indescribable apprehension toward Qin Pinyin, the only person who had defeated him before. Two small craters appeared on the wall. Like a vicious arrow, Ma Kuxuan shot toward his opponent. Qin Pinyin suppressed his true qi into his core abode. He stomped the ground and nimbly slid back. He suddenly unleashed his power, and with a boom, the tiles under his straw sandals cracked and sent clouds of dust into the air. Ma Kuxuan continued to throw punches, and his attacks rained down on Qin Pinyin like a torrential downpour. Qin Pinyin retreated as he fought, but he continued to face his opponent head-on and used punches to deal with punches. Ma Kuxuan's attacks were forceful and relentless, and he unleashed attack after attack as if he had no idea what fatigue even meant. Even though he was in midair and his feet had no contact with any surface, Ma Kuxuan was still able to unleash tremendously powerful strikes. Thuds and cracks echoed from between them. It was as if someone were furiously beating a war drum. Ma Kuxuan's relentless attacks forced Qin Pinyin to retreat a dozen steps. Right now, Qin Pinyin's back was almost against the wall. However, possessing an advantage in the sense that his feet were on solid ground, Qin Pinyin was able to make use of this to borrow power or dissipate power. As they exchanged blows, he was able to gain a slight advantage thanks to this. A moment later, Qin Pinyin stomped on the ground with both feet and forcefully blocked Ma Kuxuan's punch. He then returned the favor with interest, throwing a ferocious punch and striking Ma Kuxuan's face. The young boy in black was sent flying backward. However, just as Qin Pinyin was about to take a deep breath and replenish his qi, Ma Kuxuan threw a sweeping kick as he flew backward, striking Qin Pinyin's neck. Ma Kuxuan had been sent flying back by Qin Pinyin's punch, and he twisted in midair so that he could land on his feet. Even so, the momentum pushed him back a few more paces. Meanwhile, Qin Pinyin was sent spinning around by Ma Kuxuan's kick, and he bent his knees slightly to stabilize himself. Then, he immediately retreated, seemingly trying to stabilize his breath. Ma Kuxuan cracked a grin, revealing his menacing white teeth. He was roughly aware of the power, speed, and flow of true qi of Qin Pinyin's fist technique now. He dashed forward, and his movements were so quick that it was as if he were using a Taoist divine movement talisman. Qin Pinyin was forced to assume a seemingly defensive fist stance. Ma Kuxuan's pupils contracted slightly, and he immediately spun around just as he was about to collide with Qin Pinyin. His feet moved quickly, and he looked much like a spinning top as he pirouetted around Qin Pinyin. He was tilted backward in an odd stance, but he didn't fall back no matter how precarious his position looked. At the same time, he made sure to maintain a distance of 1 arm's length between himself and Qin Pinyin. Qin Pinyin didn't recklessly try to punch Ma Kuxuan. After spinning around in a couple full circles, Ma Kuxuan finally managed to arrest his momentum and stand up straight. He nimbly darted from place to place around Qin Pinyin again, and he asked in a curious voice, "This punch is very dangerous. Does it have a name?" Qin Pinyin naturally wouldn't answer his question. He lightly shifted his feet, and he made sure that he was always facing Ma Kuxuan. All the while, he remained in his usual fist stance with fist intent coursing through his entire body. Meanwhile, the burst of true qi that was like a fiery dragon also continued to swim around his body. Ma Kuxuan received no response, but this didn't stop him from leisurely dancing around Qin Pinyin. He suddenly chuckled to himself and said, "Oh, how stupid of me. I don't blame you. I came across many so-called grandmasters and gallant cultivators when I traveled around the cultivation world this time, and when they fought with each other and exchanged blows, there would always be countless idiots on the sidelines clapping and shouting in excitement. The fights between these people truly looked like little chicks pecking at rice. This might sound funny, but before they unleashed their strikes, they would always like to shout, 'Eat my attack,' and other such. Sometimes, they would stupidly reveal the name of their technique as if they were afraid of their opponent not understanding the essence of their sword strike or whatever." Ma Kuxuan smiled with squinted eyes, and his expression appeared especially relaxed and lazy. Even though he said that he only wanted to determine a victor and that he would hold back, his killing intent at this moment was in no way different from his killing intent during their previous battle at the Immortal Tomb. He stood still and suggested, "It's pointless for the two of us to face each other. Now that I suppressed my power to your level, you can actually force a draw. Chun Pingyan, do you want to make things a little more interesting?" Chun Pingyan pursed his lips and said, "You can use your 5th-tier cultivation. I won't consider this as you taking advantage." The usually taciturn Chun Pingyan was directly throwing Ma Kuxuan's words back at him. To the proud and haughty young boy from true Martial Mountain, even if Chun Pingyan slapped him in the face, it wouldn't have been as insulting. He simply replied with a chuckle. There was a dazzling smile on his face, but he was actually seething with anger on the inside. He continued to clench and loosen his fist, and arcs of snow-white lightning crackled between his fingers. As it turned out, when suppressing himself to the 3rd tier and fighting against Chun Pingyan, he had also refrained from using his militarian techniques. Thus, their fight had appeared especially worldly and unrefined. Chun Pingyan was unfazed, however, and his fist intent soared rapidly like a roaring river. This time, however, he changed his ancient deity drumming technique stance into the intense and unrestrained heavy cavalry formation shattering technique stance. In the end, Chun Pingyan said something that steeled Ma Kuxuan's resolve to kill him, as if the latter hadn't been resolved enough already. "Ma Kuxuan, I'm begging you, just fight me if you want to. But can you stop spewing so much nonsense?" Ma Kuxuan took a deep breath and wiped away his expression of laziness. His eyes were emotionless, and there was neither haughtiness nor joy or anger. His expression was calm, and he extended a finger and asked, "Do you dare to fight inside the 2nd circle that I drew with my movements just then? The person who steps out of the circle first loses." Chun Pingyan nodded in acknowledgement. Ma Kuxuan strode forward and entered the circle without hesitation. Chun Pingyan from Clay Vase Alley, Ma Kuxuan from Apricot Blossom Alley. Both of them were well aware of their situation. Ma Kuxuan wanted to decide more than just victory and defeat. He wanted to decide life and death as well. Chun Pingyan, on his part, was unwilling to retreat. More precisely, any thoughts of retreat would mean death. Moreover, Chun Pingyan wouldn't feel guilty about killing someone like Ma Kuxuan, a bastard who would kill more people the more powerful he became. Their encounter in this foreign country was a coincidence. Ever since their encounter in the small town, however, the formless battle between their great Tao was destined. Moreover, there was also the conflict between their fathers that Ma Kuxuan was aware of but Chun Pingyan was still oblivious to. In colorful garment nation that resided in eastern treasured Vile continent, and on the quiet street that resided in the prefectural city of Blusher Prefecture, Chun Pingyan made the first move using the heavy cavalry formation shattering technique. The inch movement talisman in his sleeve was already prepared and ready to use, and he could unleash his true killing technique, the deity drumming technique, at any moment. He could use this to drive home his advantage. Profound lightning from true Martial Mountain appeared in the hands of Ma Kuxuan. He was truly a 5th-tier militarian cultivator. They stood within a few feet of each other, within the small area marked by Ma Kuxuan's circle. However, this small area was filled with the fist intent and astonishing lightning of the two young boys. This was a deadly fight at close quarters. Taking into account their cultivation base alone, the battle between a martial artist at the peak stage of the 3rd tier and a militarian chi refiner at the peak stage of the 5th tier could, in fact, be viewed as little chicks pecking at rice in the words of Ma Kuxuan. Taking into account Chun Pingyan's martial arts fist intent and Ma Kuxuan's militarian soul that he had nurtured long ago, however, this would be a stunning sight even from the point of view of immortal clans and forces in the mountains, to say nothing of the cultivation world outside the mountains. Ma Kuxuan shattered Chun Pingyan's heavy cavalry formation shattering technique before the latter could accumulate his true fist intent. However, it wasn't long before Ma Kuxuan was solidly struck by a full punches from the deity drumming technique. A faint golden glow appeared on Ma Kuxuan's face, and he was forced to use a secret technique from true Martial Mountain to forcefully halt the momentum of the strange fist technique. Afterward, Ma Kuxuan launched several attacks of his own, causing Chun Ping'an to bleed from the temple. Chun Ping'an was also struck by 2 orbs of lightning, and it was as if spring thunder had exploded next to his ear and his face had been smashed by a sledgehammer. However, he had already experienced all kinds of pain in the bamboo building in Downtrodden Mountain, so he genuinely couldn't be bothered to acknowledge this level of injury. Ma Kuxuan became increasingly brave and ferocious as he fought, like a crazed demon. The 2 young boys from Dragon Spring Prefecture exchanged relentless blows head-on. They pursued speed, and they were willing to injure themselves to strike their opponent. With their tenacity and ferocity, they were willing to risk grave injury if it meant they could gain even a sliver of an advantage over their opponent. Thus, even when it was clearly possible for them to block their opponent's strike, they would still choose to face the strike head-on such that they could throw a strike of their own. Chun Ping'an's internal organs were churning, and blood was flowing from all 7 orifices on his face. Ma Kuxuan's aura was also chaotic, and agonizing pain gripped at his heart. There wasn't much lightning left in his hands. However, both of them became increasingly calm and grounded. They were treating each other as whetstones to temper and refine their great Tao. The final time the 2 of them exchanged strikes and wounds, Chun Ping'an suddenly decided to change his attack after a thought occurred to him. Standing meditation was used to nurture his soul, but he chose to use this stance to attack at this moment. He moved his hands apart, but his chi remained connected as he jabbed 2 fingers into Ma Kuxuan's glabella and another 2 fingers into Ma Kuxuan's chest. Meanwhile, Chun Ping'an was also struck in the chest by 2 punches from Ma Kuxuan. Both of them stumbled back in unison, and Ma Kuxuan swallowed a mouthful of blood when he stepped outside the circle. There was a sinister smile on his face as he announced, "Chun Ping'an, you've lost this time. Now we have 1 victory each." Chun Ping'an remained silent, and he shuffled his feet as he kept his eyes fixed on Ma Kuxuan. He used the back of his hand to slowly wipe the blood from his face, but he didn't dare to cover his vision for a single instant. Right at this moment, someone standing on the wall smiled faintly and said, "Very well." Ma Kuxuan sighed and turned around to leave. Turning his head back to look at Chun Ping'an, he pointed at him and said, "Next time we meet, we'll decide victory and defeat as well as life and death." Ma Kuxuan's face was twisted in pain as he slowly walked forward, but he gritted his teeth and didn't allow himself to make a single sound. Chun Ping'an stood still and looked up at that familiar figure. It was the militarian cultivator from True Martial Mountain who had brought Ma Kuxuan away from the immortal tomb. When the 15th punch of the deity drumming technique was interrupted, Chun Ping'an had already noticed the presence of this person. More accurately, this person had purposely made his presence known to Chun Ping'an. Because of this, Chun Ping'an had decided against using his 2 bonded flying swords. The militarian cultivator had transmitted to Chun Ping'an that he didn't need to worry about deciding life or death. Instead, he simply needed to fight using his full strength. Once victory and defeat was decided, the militarian cultivator would stop the victor from attempting to kill the loser no matter who the victor was. The man strode forward and walked next to Ma Kuxuan, whose face was filled with tears of pain. He turned to Chun Ping'an and said, "In order to express my apology and gratitude, I've helped you dispose of 1 hidden assassin. Otherwise, it would have been extremely difficult for you to gather your concentration and engage in another fight after relaxing your mind. It would have been very easy for that assassin to take advantage of your situation." Chun Ping'an nodded in acknowledgement. Why the so-called gratitude? The militarian cultivator was well aware of the fact that Chun Ping'an's foot hadn't actually made contact with the ground outside the circle. Instead, the young boy's foot had remained in mid-air. However, Ma Kuxuan had been at his limit after the final clash, so he hadn't been able to notice this minor detail. As for why Chun Ping'an was still so cautious, this was because he didn't trust the words of that militarian cultivator from True Martial Mountain at all. There was only one Mr. Qi, and there was only one Aoyang on the tall stage in the middle of the lake. The old immortal demonstrated his incredible abilities again, using 4 yellow paper talismans to summon 4 beautiful women. They were all shapely and beautiful in different ways, and they were no inferior to the beautiful woman in colorful robes just then. He then asked the well-prepared attendants and servants in the residence to carry a guqin and guqin table, a go table and go set, and a large desk and the 4 treasures of the study onto the stage. There was a dazzling array of items. Mortal humans cared about firewood, rice, oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, and tea, while scholars and refined people naturally cared about guqin, go, calligraphy, and painting. The latter group of people did no housework or hard labor, and their sleeves were filled with elegant and refreshing wind. The old immortal pointed at the woman gracefully sitting in front of the Go table before cupping his fists and asking in a loud voice, "Are there any Go masters in Blusher Prefecture? If anyone manages to defeat her, then they'll be able to take this Go table and the 2 boxes of Go pieces that are worth 1,000 taels of gold." Nothing in this residence was cheap. In any case, one naturally wouldn't dare to show off cheap and ordinary items in front of so many officials and wealthy nobles. Colorful Garment Nation's Blusher Prefecture was especially fond of scholarly arts, so there were many people in the prefectural city who were passionate and skilled at Go. It wasn't long before an elder in azure stood up and walked toward the tall stage in the middle of the lake. Upon seeing this, some haughty Go players could only obediently sit back down. Judging from this, it was clear that the elder in azure was definitely the #1 Go player in Blusher Prefecture. The old immortal and the elder in azure acknowledged each other with a nod. The latter then walked to the Go table and sat down. Before starting the game, the 2 sides needed to decide who played first. Perhaps the elder was feeling conceited about his 7th rank, or perhaps he viewed himself as the elder among the 2 people at the same rank, so he immediately grabbed a handful of white pieces. The woman who was transformed from a yellow paper talisman smiled faintly before bending down to retrieve 2 black pieces. After counting the white pieces, it was decided that the elder in azure would use black and play first. A chorus of raucous cheers instantly rang out around the lake. As one of the top-notch Go players in Colorful Garment Nation, the elder in azure was naturally the pride of Blusher Prefecture. As such, it was only reasonable for the guests around the lake to cheer for him. After all, they would naturally support their own. The old immortal pointed toward the 2 women sitting behind the large desk. He pointed at the woman to the left and said, "Prefectural Overseer Lu, I heard that you've been worried about something recently. The newly constructed temple is still missing a couplet, so after she finishes writing one up, you can have a look at it and decide whether you want to use it or not. Your essays are brilliant and well-renowned throughout the imperial court, and your exquisite judgment will naturally allow you to make a good decision." Prefectural Overseer Lu stroked his beard as he nodded and smiled. He appeared both reserved and pleased. The old immortal then turned his attention to the general sitting beside Prefectural Overseer Lu in the waterside pavilion. He laughed loudly and said, "General Ma, you're a brave general with great merits, and you were once a member of the core forces who guarded the border of Colorful Garment Nation. You only returned after experiencing 100 battles. Even though I'm from a foreign nation, I still have utmost respect for you. So, I'm going to humbly ask her to paint a snowy battlefield scene for you." The general downed the wine in his glass and roared with delighted laughter. "If the painting is good, and if it can truly capture the vast atmosphere of the battlefield, then I'll personally see you off for 15 kilometers when you leave." The old immortal cupped his fists and thanked the general in advance. He then walked to the Guqin table and retrieved a stick of incense from his sleeve. He placed the stick of incense in an empty copper censer and personally lit it up. Smoke wafted into the sky, and a purple aura drifted around the incense. He nodded at the beautiful woman sitting in front of the Guqin, and the latter gave a pleasant smile before lowering her head and starting to prepare herself mentally. When the melodious and ethereal tune of the Guqin sounded, the minds of the hundreds of guests around the lake immediately started to relax. In the primitive past, sages invented the Guqin to write the sounds of the world. The Guqin could restrict lust and evil and right one's mind. Sitting inside a corridor, Xianxia snacked on sunflower seeds as he clicked his tongue in wonder. He's got quite a few tricks up his sleeves. However, they're all so gentle and mellow, so this is lacking some excitement. The big-bearded martial artist had little knowledge regarding the scholarly arts of Guqin, Go, calligraphy, and painting, so it was only normal that he was feeling a distinct lack of interest. He was more willing to watch those women brandish their swords. The woman in colorful robes and the 8 young women in white had twisted their hips and vaguely shown off the curves of their supple bottoms. That was the kind of beautiful scene that he liked to watch. The young scholar Lu Gaohua was also addicted to Go, so he was very interested in the game between the elder in azure and the young woman. However, he didn't have the right to enter the stage to watch the game, and he could only blame himself for being such an incapable descendant of an official. Zhang Shanfeng was truly worried at this moment. After waiting for so long, Chun Ping'an was still yet to return from his trip to the toilet. He hadn't truly fallen into the toilet, had he? Ignoring the surrounding guests rolling their eyes at him, he gave Xianxia and Lu Gaohua a heads-up before standing up and heading off to look for Chun Ping'an. The old immortal had a tranquil smile on his face as he stood with his hands inside his opposite sleeves. He appeared profound and enigmatic, and he observed everything that was happening around the lake. He knew that half of his plan had already succeeded. Ma Kuxuan retrieved a small porcelain bottle as he walked along the street. After pouring 2 silver pills into his hand and tossing them into his mouth, he said in exasperation, "Master, you're like a ghost that can't stop haunting me." By the looks of it, his master had been following him around the entire time during his travels and fights in the cultivation world. Ma Kuxuan felt extremely helpless and exasperated about this. However, he roughly understood his master's character. The man was a stubborn and pedantic person who would become unwavering once he set his mind on something. Ma Kuxuan wasn't feeling guilty or anything. In fact, the old ancestor who had taught the secret techniques of the militarian sect to him and bestowed him with powerful immortal treasures had told him that apart from the Mountain Master's order, true Martial Mountain didn't have any genuine rules or regulations. Moreover, the sect master had already cultivated in seclusion for 100 years, so order had long since become lax. The man remained silent. He had left true Martial Mountain this time in order to protect Ma Kuxuan as he went to seek trouble with the commander of the Sea-Tide Cavalry. This pertained to the death of Ma Kuxuan's grandmother. The empire that the Sea-Tide Cavalry belonged to had coincidentally fought a brutal war with its mortal enemy not long ago. It had been an earth-shattering war. One empire had deployed its deity that measured 300 meters in height, while the other empire had also deployed a colossal bull that was responsible for guarding the nation. Apparently, it was an iron bull that immortals had used to suppress the waters in the ancient past. The Sea-Tide Cavalry had suffered heavy casualties in the war, and Ma Kuxuan's infiltration had also resulted in the death of 3 additional middle-rank generals in a single night. After assassinating them, Ma Kuxuan had left without a care in the world. Afterward, the military and cultivator hadn't rejected Ma Kuxuan's request when the young boy had said that he wanted to travel through the cultivation world to temper his physique. However, he had continued to secretly follow Ma Kuxuan around, lest anything untoward happen to the young boy. Ma Kuxuan wiped his tears away and exhaled heavily. He then placed his hands behind his head and asked, if Chun Ping'an had the opportunity to kill me, would you step forward to kill him first?" The man finally replied, saying, "I don't dare and I don't want to either." He wouldn't dare to because of a certain person that had once barged into the palace of the Greatly Empire and severely damaged the White Jade capital. That person clearly had a strong relationship with Chun Ping'an. If it were only this, then some people would still feel the itch to target Chun Ping'an as time went on. Unexpectedly, however, the transcendent sword immortal at the upper 5 tiers had returned to the mortal world much sooner than anyone had expected. Even though he had been pummeled into the majestic world by True Invincible, the second disciple of the Tao ancestor, how many people in the world were even qualified to take a full power punch from this person? He didn't want to because he had a fairly good impression of Chun Ping'an. If it weren't for the request of the sect, he felt like the young boy from Clay Vase Alley who had already comprehended the true intent of fist techniques was, in fact, more suitable than Ma Kuxian to become his disciple. However, the sect leader had issued a strict decree during a critical moment of his seclusion, and he had ordered True Martial Mountain to take Ma Kuxuan as a direct disciple and treat this matter with utmost importance. He wouldn't accept a single mistake. Otherwise, he would hold those in charge accountable once he exited seclusion. It was because of this that True Martial Mountain had sent him to Jewel Small World. While fighting over Ma Kuxuan with the Golden Boy and Jade Girl from Divine Edict sect, the military and cultivator had also been unwilling to take a backward step the entire time. In fact, he had appeared extremely stubborn and unruly, aggressive even. With that said, it was actually incorrect to view the man as Ma Kuxuan's master, even in name only. The Buddhist sect had lecturer monks, ascetic monks, missionary monks, guardian monks, and so on. In the same vein, the military and cultivator's true role was the Tao guardian of Ma Kuxuan. He was responsible for protecting Ma Kuxuan as the latter progressed through his journey of comprehending the Great Tao. As such, it wasn't important whether Ma Kuxuan's Great Tao aligned with his or not. "But you may kill Chun Ping'an." "Well, that's if you have the ability," the man suddenly added. The man naturally wasn't encouraging Ma Kuxuan to do this. Instead, he was simply stating a fact. Ma Kuxuan sneered and replied, "If I have the ability to, why wouldn't I have the ability to? Other people might not know how many immortal treasures are in my pocket treasure, but you know it very well." The man smiled and countered, "You have immortal treasures, but your opponent doesn't have any?" Ma Kuxuan cracked a grin and said with a scornful expression, "So what if he has immortal treasures as well? Can they compare to mine? To say nothing of the golden immortal mold passed down through the generations in True Martial Mountain. Just the two heroic spirits guarding my soul are akin to the most destructively powerful sword cultivators. As long as my opponent isn't at the middle 5 tiers, so what if they stab me hundreds or thousands of times with their flying sword? Will they be able to harm a single hair of mine? Then why didn't you use them? Why did you insist on getting beaten up so badly? The man asked. This fight was far more interesting than those small skirmishes on True Martial Mountain. How can I willingly use those crappy immortal treasures to defeat that person and have him suffer a confused death? This goes against my personality, and I'm not willing to bully Chen Pingyan either. So, I'm going to comprehensively defeat him in the area that he views as his greatest asset and advantage. Isn't he a pure martial artist who possesses an innate advantage in terms of physique? Then I'll use my physique that's been tempered by military and cultivation methods to fight with him head-on. Master, did you truly think I was unaware of the strangeness and power of Chen Pingyan's fist technique, simply because I confined our fight to a small area? Ma Kuxuan smiled and continued. I was well aware of this. Otherwise, I wouldn't have purposely avoided Chen Pingyan's fist technique the first time around. However, when I thought about it, why did I need to avoid the fist technique of a third-tier martial artist? Since this was the case, would I also need to avoid the attacks of 6th-tier martial artists and 9th-tier grandmasters in the future? Even if I become more powerful and possess the upper hand in terms of cultivation base, will I still need to avoid the attacks of N-tier grandmasters like Song Chongjing? Then what's your answer? The man asked. Ma Kuxuan looked back. The two of them had already walked very far, and they were soon about to arrive at the city gate. The young boy with the wooden sword case was already nowhere to be seen. Ma Kuxuan retracted his gaze, and a look of determination appeared in his eyes as he replied, If I'm fighting against other people in the future, then I can decide whether or not to avoid their most powerful attacks depending on the situation. This won't matter as long as I win in the end. However, I can't accept this if it's against that person. I insist on using my physique as a 5th-tier chi refiner to fight against him, a 3rd-tier martial artist. The man didn't offer a response. Ma Kuxuan frowned and asked, Why is Chen Pingyan's physique so powerful even though he's only at the 3rd tier? Even though I didn't do too well in terms of tempering my physique, having spent more of my time and effort to recruit ancestral heroic spirits of True Martial Mountain, my so-called not too well is only in comparison to myself. How does Chen Pingyan possess such an unreasonably powerful physique? The man shook his head and replied, Everyone has their own fated opportunity. Do you think you are able to obtain all of the good things in the world? Ma Kuxuan snickered and said, As long as it's within my vision or reach, then all of the good things in the world should belong to me and only me. The man dismissed this with a smile. There were many things that he didn't say and many principles that he didn't explain, but this didn't mean that Ma Kuxuan was correct. There were also many words of praise that he didn't offer, but this didn't mean that Ma Kuxuan hadn't done well enough. Dao Guardians simply needed to guarantee that the person they were guarding could walk higher and further along their path of the Great Dao. They simply needed to be protected from premature death. As for Ma Kuxuan, he was destined to walk very high and very far. As for how high and how far exactly, and which historical figure he could rival, many mighty figures hidden in the background of Eastern treasured Vile Continent were watching on with eager anticipation. As they walked, Ma Kuxuan eventually held a hand to his abdomen and a hand to his face, cursing, "It hurts so fucking much." Chen Pingyan forcefully replenished his chi and didn't allow his concentration to falter. After doing this, he swept his gaze around to look for the so-called assassin. There was no corpse on the street, so he could only jump onto the wall and dash forward with his back slightly bent. He suddenly stopped after a while, and he lightly jumped to the ground. This was where he and Ma Kuxuan had first confronted each other. There was a pile of ashes sitting here, and there was also a small white bowl and a charcoal-like piece of ebony resting on top of the ashes. Chen Pingyan didn't walk over, and he remained still in the same spot as he focused his gaze. The true appearances of the 5 mountains were painted on the outside of the exquisite white bowl. However, he couldn't detect anything special about the piece of ebony. This assassin had most likely been killed in an instant by the Militarian Cultivator from True Martial Mountain. The Militarian Cultivator had then used a secret technique to disintegrate the assassin's corpse into a pile of ashes. However, he hadn't destroyed the 2 precious treasures owned by the assassin, and he had instead purposely left them lying here. Perhaps this was the Militarian Cultivator's way of apologizing to him? Chen Pingyan hesitated for a moment before walking over and squatting down. He picked up the piece of ebony that was only a foot long. It was quite hefty, and it surprisingly weighed 4 to 5 kilograms. He then picked up the small white bowl and spun it around in his hands. Examining it carefully, he saw that there were names written next to the drawings of the 5 mountains. If Chun Ping'an remembered it correctly, these were most likely the 5 mountains of ancient Elm Nation. It wasn't difficult for Chun Ping'an to guess the assassin's identity. This was most likely someone sent by the scholar with the surname Chu from the ancient residence. According to his claims, even the emperor of ancient Elm Nation only enjoyed the same standing as him. Before dying, his body had also transformed into rotten wood, clearly a sign that he had used a substitution technique to avoid death. He had made a threat as well, saying that he would definitely cause trouble for Chun Ping'an in the future. Afterward, things had become simple and clear when Yang Huang had explained the situation regarding his wife and her female elmwood core. The foundation of Scholar Chu's great Tao had been his body, which was transformed from a section of ancient elm, as well as the female elmwood core of the female ghost from the ancient residence. It was due to this that the tree spirit had used the term again and again, after being suppressed by Chun Ping'an. Since these were relics left by his mortal enemy, Chun Ping'an didn't feel a shred of guilt when taking them. Not only that, but he even started to grumble about how poor the assassin was. How did they have so few possessions? Why didn't they have a few dozen snowflake coins on them? Chun Ping'an placed the small white bowl and the hefty piece of ebony in his pocket treasure. He was truly unable to walk much further, so he dragged himself another dozen or so steps to a tall and sturdy apricot tree next to the wall. He leaned against the wall and slowly sat down. He then retrieved a clean shirt from 15th and carefully wiped off his blood. After all, he couldn't run back to the lakeside corridor with his body drenched in blood after saying that he was going to the toilet. Could he? Not only would Su Yuanxia and Zhang Shanfeng feel suspicious of him, but even the other guests in the corridor would very likely create a scene. Today was a lively and bustling day, so Chun Ping'an didn't want to become the center of attention. He didn't want to cause trouble for Lu Gaohua either. Chun Ping'an was able to endure hardships and withstand pain, but this didn't mean that hardships and pain were any less uncomfortable. His internal organs were wounded quite heavily during his life and death battle with Ma Kuxuan inside the circle, so all he wanted to do right now was to sit down and not think about anything. The performance on the tall stage in the middle of the lake was still ongoing, so Chun Ping'an could still hear the applause and delighted shouts of the guests around the lake. However, his sight was blocked by a corridor and the packed guests, so he was unable to see the spectacular performance directed by the old immortal. He couldn't do anything about this, so he decided to glance up and look around instead. The old apricot tree beside him had a large crown and many branches. There were many blooming apricot blossoms, and the tree enjoyed many wisps of spring breeze. Different people were indeed very different from each other. Ma Kuxuan had also come from the small town, but he was the kind of person extremely indifferent toward things that he didn't care about. For example, he had never cared about other people calling him a retard and stepping on his new shoes to make them dirty. When it came to things that he did care about, however, he couldn't accept other people being better than him, not even by a single bit. On the contrary, Lu Xianying would choose to directly give up when he realized that Chun Ping'an had surpassed him. For example, he had chosen to give up on bow-making, trap-laying, and so on. As for Gukan, the snotty little kid from Clay Vase Alley, he had hoped for Chun Ping'an to become even more skilled and capable. That way, he could also share in the honor by following behind Chun Ping'an. Of course, apart from these people's innate personality, their actions also depended on the closeness or distance of their relationship with other people. Chun Ping'an grabbed his sword-nurturing gourd and took a swig of liquor. A burning sensation tore through his acupoints, making him feel even worse than before. However, this was the strange nature of the world. Even though this was incredibly painful, Chun Ping'an couldn't help but want to drink more as he grimaced and bared his teeth. He didn't drink in large mouthfuls, however, but rather in small sips. For poor drunkards, even liquid left over from the distillation process was a divine delicacy. As for the Xiaojiu in Chun Ping'an's gourd, it would have been considered a delicious liquor even to people of much more refined taste. He felt slightly stifled and aggrieved after his battle with Ma Kuxuan today, but even more delighted and satisfied. Even though Ma Kuxuan had been careless, allowing Chun Ping'an to have a draw with him, Chun Ping'an had never viewed victory or defeat with much importance anyway. Just like Aoyang said, one needed to avoid death and live on if one wanted to enjoy life. Chun Ping'an felt like Aoyang's words were unrefined, but the meaning behind them was far from unrefined. And thus, Chun Ping'an raised his wine gourd high above his head. He shook it slightly and immediately faltered. A sullen expression spread across his face as he lowered his wine gourd in annoyance. At the same time, he swallowed the grand rhetoric and rousing declarations that had already reached the tip of his tongue. As it turned out, There was no liquor left. Chun Ping'an lowered his head and retied his wine gourd to his waist. He suddenly recalled something, and he communicated with 15th with his mind. It wasn't long before an embroidered bag appeared in his hands. Opening it, he saw 3 pieces of peach cake. He leaned down to sniff it, and he determined that it hadn't gone off at all. Pocket treasures were truly mystical, and even after so long, it had kept the peach cakes almost as fresh as when he had received them on Downtrodden Mountain. Chun Ping'an held the bag in one hand and used his other hand to grab a peach cake. He put it in his mouth and chewed carefully. At the same time, he rested his head against the wall and looked up at the many apricot blossoms decorating the tree. After eating an entire piece of peach cake, Chun Ping'an was reluctant to eat more. He carefully put the embroidered bag away. There was a radiant smile on his face. The peach cakes from my shop are so delicious. His first thought was to give these cakes to Ning Yao for her to try. Chun Ping'an foolishly chuckled to himself for a while as he daydreamed about their reunion. However, he suddenly slapped himself and scolded himself. Are you stupid? There was no medicinal water prepared by Wei Bo for Chun Ping'an to bathe in. So his speed of recovery was incredibly slow compared to before. In fact, the difference in speed was like the difference between walking and flying on a sword. However, walking wouldn't be an issue after he rested for a while. Just as Chun Ping'an was about to stand up and return to the corridor, he suddenly heard the sound of footsteps traveling over from a distance. One set of footsteps was heavy, while one set of footsteps was light. It was most likely a man and a woman. Chun Ping'an thought for a moment before deciding to stay where he was. He was hidden by the apricot tree, so he could stand up and leave after these 2 people passed by. However, what happened next left Chun Ping'an stunned and speechless. The man was seemingly not from Colorful Garment Nation, so he conversed with the woman using the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. After arriving in a shadowy location near the apricot tree, they embraced each other and started to breathe heavily. The woman's mouth was gently denying the man's advances, but her hands were saying something else entirely. The man was also a shameless person, and he was running his lips all over the woman's face and neck. It was very likely that his hands were doing improper things as well. Chun Ping'an felt slightly uneasy. What should he do? Call out to warn this pair of illicit lovers? Or hope that they would stop after a while and leave? It was best not to become involved with these matters and watch on for too long. Otherwise, if he were caught, he would be marked as a filthy peeping Tom even if he wasn't. He hesitated for a moment before ultimately deciding to stand up and cough. The young woman standing close to the apricot tree shrieked and hid behind the man. The man strode around the apricot tree and glared at Chun Ping'an, whose face was unclear at this moment. Seeing that this was a skinny young boy who wasn't especially tall, the man immediately felt a strong sense of confidence. Don't be scared. I won't abandon you even if this rapist who's coveting your beauty beats me to death. If he wants to target you, then he can do it over my dead body. The young woman broke into sobs. However, it was unclear whether this was out of fear or because she was moved by the man's words. She rested her shoulder against the man's wide and warm back and murmured in deep emotion. Mr. Liu, you're so good to me. Chun Ping'an faltered upon seeing this. He wasn't angry, and he simply didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Perhaps these 2 people had been whipped in the head by cowtails when they were younger? However, remaining in a deadlock wasn't helpful to anyone. So Chun Ping'an could only find himself an excuse. He pretended to be embarrassed as he said, Young master, young mistress, please don't misunderstand. I arrived here earlier than the 2 of you. This is my first time in this residence, and I don't know where the toilet is. So, I could only... However, the man immediately cut him off with a loud roar. Lecher, rapist, hurry up and tighten your belt. What are you trying to do? How repulsive. How can there be such perverted and debauched people in the world? At the same time, he didn't forget to comfort the terrified young woman standing behind him. Don't worry, Miss Liu. Just hide behind me. Don't dirty your eyes by looking at this kind of person. In the end, the man secretly winked and pulled a face at Chun Ping'an. His expression was smug, and his face looked as punchable as could be. It was as if his face were saying, I'm going to play the role of a hero saving a beauty today, so I'm going to take advantage of this situation and win over this young lady. Little brat, hit me if you dare. Chun Ping'an looked at him. He was a fairly handsome young man. His figure was slender, and his face was like jade. He looked like a typical frail scholar. It was no wonder the big-bearded martial artist always muttered that there weren't many good and honest scholars in the world, and that there were too many blind and foolish beauties in the world. These beauties were actually uninterested in him, Xianxia, and they were instead interested in those frail and sickly scholars. Chun Ping'an stepped forward and instantly arrived before the young scholar. One slap later, the young scholar collapsed to the side, unconscious before he even hit the ground. The jaw of the young woman fell open in shock. There was a dazed look in her eyes, and she wanted to shriek in terror. However, she didn't dare to, and she could only forcefully suppress her urge. She was afraid that this violent thug would kill her as well. At that time, wouldn't she and her new lover become a pair of dead mandarin ducks? However, weren't talented scholars and beautiful ladies supposed to face disapproval from their parents instead? After overcoming all kinds of obstacles and challenges, weren't they supposed to ultimately obtain happiness and become a couple? The novels never talked about talented scholars and beautiful ladies being brutally beaten to death by thugs and rapists. Chun Ping'an strode forward and left. He adjusted the wooden case on his back, and he didn't take a single backward glance at the talented scholar and beautiful lady. Chun Ping'an returned to the lakeside corridor. After sitting down, he noticed that Zhang Shanfeng wasn't present. He asked Su Yuanxia about this, and the big-bearded martial artist joked around and said that the young Taoist priest had met a beautiful young lady, and the two of them had decided to go on a night adventure together. Lu Gaohua started to make things up along this line as well. Chun Ping'an naturally didn't believe them. However, there was a strange look in his eyes as he looked at the face of Lu Gaohua, the only son of the prefectural overseer. There couldn't be such coincidental matters in the world. Could there? After hesitating for a moment, he asked, "Do you have any married sisters?" Lu Gaohua was baffled by the question, and he replied, "No, I don't. I have an older sister and a younger sister, but just like me, neither of them are married yet. We're still sponging food and drink from home. Our father always scolds us and calls us a bunch of incompetent fools, saying that his salary is completely wasted by us. This is especially the case since he needs to prepare dowries and betrothal gifts. Because of this, he claims that he's been unable to buy desk decorations for many years." Chun Ping'an breathed a sigh of relief. Thankfully, she wasn't married yet. Otherwise, if this woman whose appearance was slightly similar to Lu Gaohua were truly his sister and were truly cheating, then he would feel bad regardless of whether he told Lu Gaohua about it or not. It wasn't long before the performance on the tall stage in the middle of the lake came to an end. There was thunderous applause, and Prefectural Overseer Lu and General Ma personally walked over to greet the old immortal and have a chat with him. They were very amiable, and they didn't act haughtily because of their status. The old immortal answered their questions adeptly, and the two officials felt especially relaxed and refreshed as they spoke with him. While they were chatting, a young man who looked to be from a noble family walked over and begged the old immortal to take him as a disciple. However, the stewards and a few servants from the residence immediately came over to drag him away. Zhang Shanfeng returned a bit later than Chun Ping'an, and he breathed a big sigh of relief when he saw his companion sitting safe and sound in the corridor. "I thought you fell into the toilet," he joked. Chun Ping'an was unwilling to reveal the battle on the street, so he replied in a low voice, "I couldn't find the toilet, but I was too embarrassed to ask the steward of the residence for its location. So, I decided to sneak away to a quiet place where there was no one. However, this took me a very long time. When I got back, I saw that there were far too many people in the corridor. I didn't want to squeeze my way in, so I chose to wait outside for a while first. After squirreling your way into the dark corners of the alley, did you manage to see any lovey-dovey scenes?" Su Yuanxia asked in a teasing voice. "I'm telling you, scholars and beautiful women are everywhere in colorful Garment Nation, especially in Blusher Prefecture. When they're bored, they all like to read some risque novels or restricted books. After reading many of them, they'll naturally want to test out some of the things written in the books." Lu Gaohua couldn't help but chuckle when he heard the big-bearded martial artist say this. He nodded and said, "Yes, that's right. My younger sister is only 13, but she's already read a few adult books in secret. However, these weren't books about romance. She's a wild and rebellious child, and she's been extremely interested in the chivalrous aspect of the cultivation world ever since she was little. She always grumbles about the men in Blusher Prefecture being too feminine and soft. Anyhow, she's learned about how to escape from her room, how to set up ladders to climb over the walls, and so on. Even though she's very smart and savvy, my mother is thankfully smarter and savvier than her. So, she's never been able to succeed." Su Yuanxia's eyes lit up, and he patted his chest and said, "Being interested in the cultivation world is a good thing. I have many stories in my belly, and just one or two of them will be the most fragrant and delicious dishes to go with wine. Lu Gaohua rolled his eyes and said, "Please don't. My younger sister is still little. Chivalrous Su, we might have a good relationship, but this is limited to the cultivation world only. In any case, won't your seniority be negatively affected if you become my brother-in-law?" The big-bearded martial artist smiled widely and said, "Don't you still have an older sister?" Lu Gaohua didn't dare to say anything, and it was as if there were something that was too awkward to say. Chun Pingyan wanted to say something, but he couldn't help but hesitate. Xianxia roared with laughter and heavily patted Lu Gaohua's shoulder. "Look at how frightened you are. I've traveled around the cultivation world for many years, and I have more lovers and soulmates than my fingers can count. I've never been interested in unmarried young girls." The performance and feast ended, and many guests gradually left the big residence. Chun Pingyan and his two companions returned to the inn. Meanwhile, Lu Gaohua was brought away by someone sent over by his father. He needed to go and socialize with the other esteemed guests. Even though he was not particularly distinguished or talented, and had almost no hope of becoming an official, he was still the prefectural overseer's only son. Thus, Prefectural Overseer Lu still hoped that Lu Gaohua could support and manage the Lu clan in the future. At the very least, he couldn't become too pathetic. Because he had obtained 2 new treasures, Chun Pingyan asked Xianxia and Zhang Shanfeng about immortal treasures as they walked back to the inn. Chun Pingyan had no option but to do this. Who could he blame? His previous companions had been far too unreasonable. Aoyang had casually kept a bamboo saber by his waist, while the young Cui Chan had spoken in a terrifyingly profound and lofty manner whenever he spoke about cultivation tiers and immortal treasures. It was as if chi refiners at the middle 5 tiers and upper 5 tiers were nothing more than little children rolling around in the mud. Their immortal treasures were naturally not worth a mention either. Meanwhile, the barefoot old man in the bamboo building had directly said that martial artists shouldn't rely on external treasures. Otherwise, if one needed to rely on external treasures to travel through the cultivation world, then one might as well stay at home and work in the fields. Chun Pingyan also felt very helpless and exasperated about this. Fortunately, Xianxia and Zhang Shanfeng's explanations allowed him to roughly understand the different grades of so-called immortal treasures. As it turned out, there was a very strict hierarchy not too dissimilar to that of the imperial court. Immortal treasure was a very general term. The lowest grade immortal treasures were craft tools, and these could only be regarded as well-made inanimate items. The descriptions of sharp enough to cut floating hair, able to slice through iron as if slicing through mud, and so on were largely used to describe these craft tools. When immortal forces in the mountains bestowed treasures upon new disciples as was customary, they would most commonly use high-quality craft tools. For example, Zhang Shanfeng's peach-wood sword. Of course, peach-wood swords bestowed upon heavenly masters by the heavenly master residents of Mount Longhu would be far superior to this. The next grade up from craft tools was valuable tools. The divine weapons and powerful tools used by grandmasters in the cultivation world largely belonged to this category. Valuable tools were made from rare materials. Ordinary cultivators, especially rootless duckweed like vagrant cultivators who belonged to no force and pure martial artists who were viewed as unable to cultivate the great Tao, would possess 1 or 2 valuable tools at most, and that if they were lucky. For example, Zhang Shanfeng dreamed of obtaining a valuable tool, and he hoped that he could obtain a Daoist sword in the future. In fact, Xianxia's saber was a peak-quality valuable tool. Following on from valuable tools were spirit tools and immortal tools. These were genuine immortal treasures. Spirit tools were further categorized as connate or acquired, with the former being rarer and more precious than the latter. Connate spirit tools were blessed by heaven and earth, and they possessed abundant spiritual chi that would allow cultivators to wield them with extreme ease. It could be said that cultivators could achieve twice the results with half the efforts when they wielded connate spirit tools. At critical moments, these connate spirit tools could even be destroyed in order to provide their owner with spiritual chi. In fact, snowflake coins could somewhat be considered as connate spirit tools as well. However, a single snowflake coin contained far too little spiritual chi, so little that it was almost negligible. Thus, chi refiners wouldn't be so foolish as to extract spiritual chi from snowflake coins to help them cultivate. Acquired spirit tools, such as high-grade yellow paper talismans or divine items carved by chi refiners, could be regarded as top-notch spirit tools. These immortal treasures were incredibly valuable. For example, the jade pendant named Old Dragon Rainbringer, owned by Old Dragon City's young master Fu Nanhua. The mandrel teapot that Fu Nanhua purchased from Song Jisun was even more valuable. Even though the demon-binding chains, demon-suppressing wood, ghost-striking whips, and other tools carried by the Qi refiners from Divine Edict sect were also acquired spirit tools. They were far inferior to Fu Nanhua's Old Dragon Rainbringer and Mandrill Teapot in terms of both value and worth. Above spirit tools were immortal tools. Immortal was a very profound word. Otherwise, it wouldn't be linked to cultivation and the three teachings. 1. Immortal tools contained the formless laws of heaven and earth. Sword nurturing gourds, which were especially used to nurture and refine flying swords, undoubtedly belonged to this category. Of course, the silver sword nurturing gourd that Aoyang had obtained from Wei Jin and the sword nurturing gourd that was tied to Sun Scorch Mountain's Sujia's waist were both top-notch sword nurturing gourds. They were like imperial children compared to the rest, especially due to their link with the Dao ancestor. According to the legends, the Dao ancestor had personally plucked a vine from a gourd plant before ascending from the world. 6 gourds had grown from the vine, and they had then been crafted into 6 sword nurturing gourds by a paramount being. Thus, these were naturally unparalleled sword nurturing gourds that ordinary sword nurturing gourds couldn't compare to. Above immortal tools, there were still celestial tools. For the large majority of Qi refiners, they would never be able to see a single celestial tool in their entire life. In fact, even sect-level forces might not necessarily possess a celestial tool. Take, for example, Divine Edict sect, the leading Taoist sect in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Only after sect leader Qizhen successfully advanced to the next tier and was promoted to the level of Heavenly Lord did he finally receive a celestial tool from their superior sect in Middle-earth Divine Continent. The bonded flying sword like a bracelet on Chao Shi's wrist could be regarded as a pseudo-celestial tool. The sword immortal from Southern World Continent had come across a huge fated opportunity, and he had used the water from a large river to craft and temper this bonded flying sword. In fact, the most terrifying thing about Chao Shi was this bonded flying sword. Of course, the most powerful celestial tools in the world were naturally surrounded by legends and remarkable stories. Those who possessed these celestial tools naturally enjoyed unparalleled fame and standing as well. For example, the Heavenly Master Seal and Immortal Sword in Mount Longhu's Heavenly Master residence, and the small copper cauldron, too, that the patriarch of the Yingyin Chen clan had coincidentally obtained during his adventures around the world when he was young. According to rumors, this small copper cauldron was a replica of the mountain and river great cauldron that an ancient sage had hung on his waist. Celestial tools were already as rare as phoenix feathers and qilin horns. Among them, however, there was an even more legendary category of tools that had birthed their own consciousness, their own god, after many, many years. These gods most definitely weren't the same as mountain gods and river gods appointed by mortal empires. Formal gods were said to have indestructible golden bodies, but before these paramount gods of spirit tools, this was nothing more than a mere joke. Chun Ping'an had a rough idea about immortal treasures now. Even disregarding his 5 mountains, he was still very, very rich. His wealth right now was very impressive and substantial. Just tonight, he had obtained a white bowl and a piece of ebony for free from the side of the street. There was also his locust wood sword eliminating fiends. Through He Xiaoliang, Lu Chen had also returned a snake gall pebble to him. Even ignoring the fact that snake gall pebbles were items coveted by flood dragons, they were still definitely the most top-notch materials for crafting spirit tools. The 3 seals that Mr. Qi had given him were all made from the best quality snake gall pebbles. Li Shixing had also given him the wind and snow all and a large stack of precious talisman papers. The sword nurturing gourd by his waist, an extremely rare item among immortal tools, was a treasure that most sword cultivators at the middle 5 tiers yearned for immensely. Inside the sword nurturing gourd were 2 bonded flying swords that had temporarily accepted him as their owner, 1st and 15th. Thus, there was a spring in the young boy's step as he walked back to his room by himself. He looked very much like the little boy in Azure, especially after a day without coming across someone who could smash him to death with a single punch. Even though Chun Ping'an was temporarily unable to confirm the exact grade and value of every item, he was confident that the items from Downtrodden Mountain definitely wouldn't be bad. He needed to drink to celebrate. There was already no liquor in his sword nurturing gourd, so Chun Ping'an went to ask the inn waiter about the price of liquor here. The cheapest local brew was at least 8 silver coins for a pint, while the inn's specialty brew was 10 taels of silver for a pint. Moreover, haggling wasn't allowed. Chun Ping'an's sword nurturing gourd could carry around 10 pints of wine, so it would only cost him 100 taels of silver if he chose the most expensive specialty brew. This was normal silver, and not snowflake coins that were specially used by immortals from the mountains. With his mountains of gold and silver and piles of spirit tools and immortal tools, how could he mistreat himself by not drinking the most expensive liquor? And thus, Chun Ping'an resolutely purchased 10 pints of local brew. Chun Ping'an, Su Yuanxia, and Zhang Shanfeng had already returned to their own rooms. Yet Lu Gaohua visited the inn and went to look for Zhang Shanfeng first. There was a very awkward expression on the face of the prefectural overseer's son, and standing behind him were a handsome scholar and a beautiful woman. The woman bore a slight resemblance to Lu Gaohua, and it was very likely that she was his older sister. Lu Gaohua explained the situation to Zhang Shanfeng. As it turned out, they were here to ask for some anti-inflammatory ointment, the kind often used by cultivators. Young Master Lu had gone to watch the old immortals performance, but he had accidentally tripped and fell because there were too many people and it was too dark on the streets. He had hit his head, and he was still feeling a little dizzy at this moment. The pharmacy in the prefectural city had already closed for the day, and his older sister was truly worried about young Master Lu's injuries. After hearing that he was acquainted with chivalrous cultivators and immortals from the mountains, she had come over to ask for some help. She was very afraid that these injuries would lead to crippling issues for young Master Lu further down the track. Moreover, she was willing to pay for his treatment. Zhang Shanfeng led the three of them to Su Yuanxia's room. The big-bearded martial artist was very generous and straightforward, and he immediately walked over to look at the frail scholar's injuries. After taking a good look at them, Su Yuanxia said that there wouldn't be any issues. However, he quickly noticed the reluctant and slightly displeased expression on the young woman's face. But who was Su Yuanxia? He was very astute and experienced, and he smiled and retrieved some ointment from his bag. He told young Master Lu to apply this cream to his temples. His injuries would definitely be healed, and it could be guaranteed that there wouldn't be any side effects. The young woman finally felt reassured. She sat down and rubbed her eyes, and there was love and deep emotions in her eyes as she stared at the young scholar. It was as if she were in a trance. The young scholar also comforted her and told her that everything would be fine, and he spoke in a very refined and sophisticated manner. The big-bearded martial artist grimaced upon seeing this. He was most afraid of these things. Even though Zhang Shanfeng was a Taoist priest, he was still very keen on fun and exciting matters like his. Moreover, happiness and fun were best shared with everyone. As such, he immediately ran away to drag Chun Ping'an over. He said that Lu Gaohua's older sister had come to visit, and that she was a fairly good-looking woman. She had also brought a refined-looking scholar with her, and it was likely that this scholar would soon become the prefectural overseer's son-in-law. Chun Ping'an had just finished pouring the wine into his sword-nurturing gourd, so his room was still filled with empty wine pots and the smell of wine. Because Zhang Shanfeng was determined to drag him over to get in on the fun, and he didn't want to reveal his secrets regarding the sword-nurturing gourd, Chun Ping'an could only abandon his plan to practice standing meditation tonight. He followed Zhang Shanfeng to Su Yuanxia's room. When he entered, the handsome scholar and the beautiful woman who had secretly met under the moonlight not long ago immediately drew a sharp breath in unison. If his enemies didn't take action, then he wouldn't take action either. Chun Ping'an pretended to not know anything, and he directly sat down on a chair next to the table. He grabbed his wine gourd and started to drink. The young scholar felt quite uneasy, and he didn't know whether to stand or to sit. Meanwhile, Lu Gaohua's older sister, the young woman who had been poisoned by unrealistic romance novels, felt even more nervous. After all, she was an unmarried young woman from a noble family, yet she had only been a step away from privately pledging herself to an unfamiliar man without her parents' permission. This was an embarrassing situation no matter how one looked at it. Even though Blusher Prefecture was relatively open-minded, it was still big news for the daughter of the prefectural overseer to be hugging and getting all touchy with a scholar from the outside. If they had been caught by someone familiar with them, it was very likely that news of this would have spread through half of the prefectural city by tomorrow. "What's wrong? Are the three of you acquainted with each other?" Lu Gaohua asked in puzzlement. The young scholar was naturally good at bullshitting, so he cleared his throat and explained, "I was strolling by the lakeside with your older sister tonight, and we coincidentally bumped into this young master. He had a sword case on his back, and he was genuinely walking with the might and presence of dragons and tigers. His aura was extraordinary, and I was instantly impressed by his disposition. Thus, I naturally remember him clearly. It's my utmost honor to meet him again." The young scholar's eyes were filled with pity and pleading as he clasped his hand in greeting. Earlier today, he had felt like the heavens had given him a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to play the role of a hero saving a beauty when he had seen Chun Ping'an's skinny arms and skinny legs. How could he let such a good opportunity slip by? Wouldn't that be wasting the goodwill of the heavens? Thus, a not-so-fairy-tale misunderstanding had occurred. Chun Ping'an felt neutral toward the young scholar. He didn't detest him much, but he certainly didn't have any good impressions of him either. He simply chuckled in reply. He didn't expose the young scholar, and he still left some room to repair the relationship. At the end of the day, Chun Ping'an was unwilling to interfere with the private matters of Lu Gaohua's family. Regardless of whether this was a positive relationship or a negative relationship, and regardless of whether they were a match made in heaven or destined for tragedy, none of this had anything to do with Chun Ping'an. However, if Lu Gaohua were swapped for Zhang Shanfeng, someone whom Chun Ping'an viewed as a true friend, then he would definitely tell the truth without any hesitation. Even if he didn't expose them in public, he would still warn Zhang Shanfeng about the situation in private. He would tell him that his future brother-in-law was far too unprincipled and unscrupulous, and that he didn't appear like a refined scholar at all. In the end, they learned that young Master Lu was an impoverished scholar who had arrived here after traveling around the world to seek knowledge. He had met Lu Gaohua's older sister by chance at a temple fair, and he was unexpectedly so poor that he had to ask Chun Ping'an and his two companions for a place to stay. However, the inn was already full, so Lu Gaohua could only smile obsequiously and beg them to take the young scholar in. This was a big eye-opener for Xianxia. It was truly rare for people to do so much for their brother-in-law. Not only did Lu Gaohua not disdain the young scholar for his poor background, but he was even going as far as to hide this ill-matched relationship for his older sister. The young scholar didn't dare to share a room with Chun Ping'an, and he wasn't willing to stay together with the big-bearded martial artist either. He was so frail and delicate, yet Xianxia appeared so crude and carnivorous. This was far too terrifying. Thus, he chose the most normal one of them, the Taoist priest, to stay with. Zhang Shanfeng had no objections to this. Lu Gaohua left the inn with his older sister, who was extremely reluctant to part with the young scholar. The siblings walked along the quiet streets that were about to enter curfew. When they were about to reach home in the prefectural office, Lu Gaohua said in a soft voice, "Big sister, I don't like that person very much. However, I'm willing to help you wherever I can since you like him. If you regret this decision one day, there's no need to feel too dejected, and there's no need to be scared even if our parents scold you or do something over the top. The sky won't fall, and I'll always be here to help you. I'm your little brother, after all." The young woman gently kicked her little brother. Her embarrassment turned into anger, and she scolded, "Lu Gaohua, can you have some faith in me? Why are you saying such inauspicious things?" Lu Gaohua turned around and made a face at her. The young woman pretended to be scared, and she shouted, "Ghost," as she lifted the hem of her dress and ran to the gate of the prefectural office. Lu Gaohua sighed and hurriedly walked after her. However, he suddenly stopped and turned around. The street behind him was empty, and he didn't see anything out of the ordinary even after looking around for a while. He shook his head and continued to the prefectural office. This was because he had felt a cold chill on his neck and down his spine just then. Lu Gaohua continued to comfort himself, telling himself that there was nothing to be afraid of. He had seen an old immortal with his father not long ago, and he had even spoken a few words with that old immortal. After basking in his immortal aura for a while, Lu Gaohua was certain that sinister beings wouldn't dare to approach him anymore. For example, beings like that tree spirit from the old residence. Just as the servant closed the side gate of the prefectural office, a night guard started to strike his gong on a deserted street in the distance. It was clearly midnight, yet he was striking the gong pattern for early morning. A hoarse voice faintly sounded on some street in Blusher Prefecture. "The weather is dry, and all things are dry, so be careful of candle flames." 3. The blind old night guard held a copper gong in his hands. There should have been a mute night guard with him, and the two of them had been companions for many years. They were very familiar with each other, and the mute night guard was responsible for striking a rattle. However, the blind night guard was completely unaware that his companion had become a woman in white tonight. When she struck her rattle, blood would spray from the surface of her instrument. However, this blood would transform into wisps of black smoke and quickly dissipate before it could land on the street. Even so, the blind old night guard continued to strike his gong and shout in a hoarse voice, "The weather is dry, and all things are dry, so be careful of candle flames." 1. The character used, fa, is technically dharma or law, with the latter being more accurate in the context. Law in this sense refers to the Buddhist law or Taoist law. We have decided against translating it as law in this case because it doesn't work like that in English. 2. Ding are prehistoric and ancient Chinese cauldrons, standing on 3 or 4 legs with a lid and 2 facing handles. They were used for rituals among other purposes. 3. This was a warning repeated by night guards/watchmen in ancient China. This is because during curfews, no one would be on the streets to notice or help someone if their house caught fire. A peaceful night passed by at the inn. Chun Ping'an was staying in a room at the end of the corridor by himself, and before going to bed, he practiced standing meditation and walking meditation for 2 hours first. In the end, he retrieved the white bowl with the illustration of the 5 mountains as well as the piece of burnt ebony. He tossed and turned them in his hands and examined them for a long time, yet he was still unable to discover anything special about them. He hoped that these 2 items would be worth 100 or 200 snowflake coins each. He put the hefty piece of ebony away, and he poured some local wine into the small white bowl. With a lamp next to him, he flipped through the 2 travel journals that Lu Gaohua had given him. From time to time, he would take a sip of the local wine. Tasted fairly decent. After putting out the lamp and climbing into bed, Chun Ping'an closed his eyes and started to replay the fight with Ma Kuxuan in his mind. He reflected on the gains and losses of each punch. The fight had been intense and extremely dangerous, so Chun Ping'an hadn't dared to conceal the fist techniques that Cui Dongshan's grandfather had taught him. Thanks to this, he was also able to gain a deeper understanding of the heavy cavalry formation shattering technique. However, it was a shame that he had only been able to throw 15 punches using the deity drumming technique. His intuition told him that if he had succeeded in throwing 20 in a row, Ma Kuxuan would have most likely been forced to admit defeat. This was just like how he had suppressed the tree spirit scholar wearing the radiant armor transformed from an armor pellet. No matter how Chun Ping'an thought about it, however, allowing Ma Kuxuan to achieve a narrow victory over him had been the best choice at the time. Apart from achieving somewhat of a draw against Ma Kuxuan, now a prodigy at True Martial Mountain, Chun Ping'an actually felt very little emotion about this fight. Firstly, he didn't understand the significance of Ma Kuxuan advancing 3 tiers in a single year. Secondly, just like how Ma Kuxuan detested him, an impoverished young boy from Clay Vase Alley, did he not detest Ma Kuxuan, someone of the same age from Apricot Blossom Alley, as well? There was indeed something like fate and destiny between people. There were some people who would immediately leave one with a good impression, as if they were warm rays of sunshine on a chilly winter day. For example, Mr. Qi, Li Shixing, and Zhang Shanfeng. Meanwhile, there were some people who would immediately leave one with a bad impression, as if these people were blinding rays of sunshine on a scorching summer day. For example, Ma Kuxuan, Old Dragon City's Fu Nanhua, and Light Breeze City's Miss Su Un. Before falling asleep, Chun Ping'an had one final thought. The deity drumming technique was definitely his most powerful fist technique right now. However, he was unsure of what would happen if he could throw 50 or even 100 punches in succession. Might he be able to sever a large river and carve a path through it? Might he be able to split a mountain and cleave a gorge through it? The first light of dawn peeked over the horizon, and Chun Ping'an had already woken up to practice the 6-step walking meditation in his room. After a short while, he noticed that someone was reciting some text in a courtyard that had a rock garden and lush green trees. It was the scholar with the surname Lu. He seemed very much like an impoverished scholar who was studying hard, and he recited the teachings of the sages with a poetic cadence. Chun Ping'an continued to practice his fist stances. Sure enough, it wasn't long before the other guests in the inn started to let loose torrents of abuse. Some short-tempered adventurers from the cultivation world directly climbed out of bed naked, grabbing bowls and plates from their table and throwing them at the impoverished scholar. Things instantly became chaotic. However, the impoverished scholar was a stubborn person, and he started to recite the classical teachings of the sages even louder as he jumped around to avoid the bowls and plates. This immediately enraged everyone. Some guests who were covering their heads and ears with their blankets cursed as they climbed out of bed and got dressed. They then walked to the window and started to communicate with the ancestors of the impoverished scholar. Things were truly as chaotic as could be. After 15 minutes or so, Chun Ping'an and Su Yuanxia both sat in Zhang Shanfeng's room. The young Taoist priest was busy bandaging up Scholar Lu's head. The owner of the inn had only just left. His expression was dark, and he was gritting his teeth in anger. How had he wound up with such a bastard guest? Not only that, but he couldn't scold or beat this person either. After all, he was an esteemed guest brought over by the son of the prefectural overseer. Thus, he could only swallow his anger and suffer in silence. The problem was that the other guests in the inn also had impressive backgrounds. Some of them were extremely wealthy merchants, and some of them were powerful adventurers from the cultivation world. In other words, none of them were pushovers that he could ignore. And now, thanks to that bastard scholar's shitshow in the morning, how could he still do business in the future? How could he expect return customers? The impoverished scholar's full name was Lu Qiqing. He was from White Mountain Nation, and when introducing his hometown, he put heavy emphasis on the fact that it was close to Lakeview Academy. It was as if this were even more honorable and glorious than the Dragontail Creek Chen clan. For the next few days, they had nothing much to do in the inn. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Lu Qiqing would often sneak out by himself. It was very obvious that he was going to meet up with Lu Gaohua's older sister. Meanwhile, Su Yuanxia took Qin Ping'an and Zhang Shanfeng around the prefectural city to visit some scenic spots and historic sites. The Wanchang Pavilion and Martial Sage Temple were places that they definitely had to visit, as was the gathering in the City God Pavilion in Blusher Prefecture. There was a slightly gloomy expression on Su Yuanxia's face when he returned, and he simply said that he was travel-worn when Zhang Shanfeng asked him about this. Qin Ping'an and Zhang Shanfeng had disembarked the Kuan ship at the ferry station in southern Stream Nation before continuing to travel south. Zhang Shanfeng was heading to the Old Dragon City, which was in the same direction as Qin Ping'an's destination. Meanwhile, the big-bearded martial artist was traveling to Azure Phoenix Nation, which was located in the southeast of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. He said he was delivering something to a friend whom he had met and become good friends with in the cultivation world. He could still travel with Qin Ping'an and Zhang Shanfeng for the moment, and in terms of when he would part ways with them, this would depend on the ferry lines available at the next ferry station. They waited for 3 entire days in Blusher Prefecture, yet they were still yet to hear anything from the cultivators from Divine Edict sect who had left the mountains to train. Instead, they received a visit from the old woman from the old residence. She traveled all the way to the prefectural office to look for them, and after seeing Lu Gaohua, the prefectural overseer's son brought her over to the inn that Qin Ping'an and the others were staying at. The old women told them the good news, saying that the fortune of the mountains and rivers near the old residence had undergone a dramatic change for the better. The impure aura had been replaced with a pure and spiritual aura. Moreover, the female owner was no longer in danger of further deterioration and transformation into a ghost, and her body and appearance were also starting to recover. Similarly, the male owner's soul was also starting to recover after no longer needing to nurture a ghost. His cultivation base started to advance, and he was surprisingly showing some small signs of being able to advance to the 5th tier. They were truly being blessed with one good fortune after another. The old woman could only speculate that they had received secret help from some old ancestor from Divine Edict sect. The big-bearded martial artist and the young Taoist priest both nodded in agreement. They felt like there was no other explanation. Emotions surged through Qin Ping'an's mind, but he maintained a calm and composed expression the entire time. Before leaving, the old woman told Qin Ping'an that she had bought him a pot of good wine while traveling over. The two of them walked to Qin Ping'an's room, and after closing the door, the teary old woman immediately wanted to kneel down. Qin Ping'an was astonished, and he quickly grabbed her arms to stop her from doing so. He refused to accept her grand gesture of gratitude no matter what. Because Qin Ping'an had purposely revealed some secrets while pouring wine into his sword-nurturing gourd back then, the old woman was indeed aware of some more things than the others. Thus, it was only natural for her to have some speculations. The old woman didn't ask anything, and Qin Ping'an didn't explain anything either. Before leaving, the old woman simply retrieved a silk-wrapped item and carefully placed it on the table. The gold statue of the illegal mountain god is well and truly shattered, so there's now one less evil god to terrorize the world, she explained in a quiet voice. This is naturally an amazing thing. Master immediately hurried over to the temple after hearing about this, and he arrived there before the group of immortals from Divine Edict sect. He secretly took more than half of the shards of the shattered gold statue, 8 pieces in total. According to Master, the shattered gold statue of an illegal mountain god shouldn't produce so many shards. So, it can be presumed that the illegal mountain god also experienced some fated opportunities while he was alive. In any case, these gold statue shards are valuable items that one can only dream of obtaining. In fact, even the secret treasury of a nation might not have many such items. Young Master Chen, please do accept them. You can treat this as a gift of gratitude from my 2 masters and me. The rims of the old woman's eyes became red, and she continued, in reality, these gold statue shards are nowhere near enough to repay young Master Chen for your great kindness and help. However, the old residence genuinely has nothing else of value, so my masters decided to erect a living tablet for young Master Chen. If young Master Chen passes by Colorful Garment Nation in your future travels, Please do come to the old residence to visit us. Chun Ping'an could only nod in agreement. At the very end, the old woman whispered, "My mistress can be considered half an illegal deity now," and when she observed Blusher Prefecture from a distance, she discovered that there were wisps of yin energy rising from the prefectural city for the past 2 nights. This has made mistress uneasy, so she hopes that young Master Chun can leave the prefectural city as soon as possible. Regardless of how capable young Master Chun is, Master always says that one can never be too cautious, especially when it comes to the journey of cultivation. It's best not to become involved in everything. Even if one manages to escape unharmed every time, it's inevitable that this will delay one's cultivation. After all, this is naturally not ideal. Chun Ping'an nodded and agreed without hesitation. After walking the old woman to the door of the inn, she smiled and said, "I wish young Master Chun a safe and sound journey." From the beginning to the end, the old woman didn't take a single glance at Chun Ping'an's vermilion wine gourd that was hanging by his waist. Chun Ping'an watched the old woman disappear into the crowd of people. He then turned around and jogged to Su Yuanxia's room. After calling Zhang Shanfeng over as well, he told them about the peculiar phenomenon in Blusher Prefecture that the old woman had warned him about. Su Yuanxia placed his hand on the hilt of his saber and said with a nod, "This is also what I'm most worried about. I didn't tell the two of you about this before because I was afraid of you guys being young and impulsive and insisting on becoming involved in this matter. If there's genuinely a demon or spirit that dares to openly commit crimes in the prefectural city with wanton disregard for the city god pavilion, the Wenchang pavilion, and the martial sage temple, then this is definitely a very powerful foe. With our lowly cultivation, perhaps we're not even enough to act as an appetizer for this enemy. However, with how large a prefectural city of a nation is, there will often be powerful cultivators and officials hiding behind the scenes. If a battle truly breaks out, these cultivators and officials will still have a chance at victory thanks to their innate geographical advantage. At the end of the day, this hinges on the relationship between the imperial court of Colorful Garment Nation and the immortal forces in the mountains. How far away are the closest river gods and mountain gods to Blusher Prefecture? If something genuinely happens, will they be able to rush over immediately? Chun Ping'an asked. The big bearded martial artist mulled over this for a short moment and replied, "The river god is 150 kilometers from here, and the formal god of Southern Mountain is approximately 350 kilometers from here. However, the mountain gods in Colorful Garment Nation won't have an especially powerful cultivation base. This is only a small nation, after all, and it's far inferior to those large empires. I'm afraid that they'll only be at the abode tier of the middle 5 tiers at most." Zhang Shanfeng frowned and asked, "Then once they leave the mountains, won't their combat power only be equivalent to chi refiners at the 5th tier? These are the laws of heaven and earth. There's nothing we can do about it," Su Yuanxia said in helplessness. "Then can we notify Lu Gaohua's father?" Zhang Shanfeng asked. "He's the prefectural overseer, after all, and General Ma, who's stationed near the prefectural city, also looks like a cultivator. If they make some preparations, perhaps they can dissuade the hidden demons and evil spirits from causing more trouble." Su Yuanxia sighed and explained, "I'm not trying to scare you guys, and this isn't a case of me being afraid of death either. However, this matter is truly very troublesome. To say nothing of whether the prefectural overseer will believe us or not, even if he does, and even if General Ma is willing to bear the risk of making false military reports and being stripped of his position, do you know how long it will take for a message to be delivered from here to the capital of Colorful Garment Nation? Even if it's delivered with the highest priority. And the message will still need to be reviewed by the 6 ministries as well as the emperor. Afterward, the emperor will need to issue an imperial edict to the imperial court and secretly order the mountain gods and river gods to render assistance to the prefectural city. Just how long will this process take? Taking a step back, even if the imperial edict is delivered, and all of the surrounding chi refiners and gods rush over to help, what should we do if our enemies catch wind of this and act earlier than initially planned and leave before our reinforcements arrive? If the imperial court wants to seek revenge in the future, who will they target? Su Yuanxia pointed at the young Taoist priest and the young boy with the sword case on his back. "Do you guys believe me if I say that we'll be treated as accomplices of the demons at that time? And if the person who exposes us isn't Prefectural Overseer Lu, then it will be General Ma? Even worse, what if our enemies had other plans to begin with? What if they're purposely luring cultivators and gods away from the other places? At that time, this prefectural city might be peaceful and quiet, yet some other immortal force or prefectural city in the nation might be turned upside down. If that's the case, then we'll immediately become irredeemable criminals who deserve the death penalty without even needing others to expose us. Feng was stupefied, and his face was transfixed with shock and slight disbelief. 1. The lady who obtained Lu Xianyang's suit of armor. 2. Living tablets are similar to ancestral tablets used to honor dead ancestors, but the color is red instead of black to differentiate between the living and the dead. These tablets are used to pray for blessings for the person honored on them. Xianxia poured himself a cup of wine and sighed with emotion. Don't think that I'm being an alarmist and trying to scare you guys. Not only have I witnessed such things before, but I've personally experienced it firsthand as well. Several of my friends died because of their kindness. Xianxia pointed at his bag nearby and said calmly, I won't go into the details, but out of us 4 friends, I was the only one who made it out alive. One of them didn't even leave a corpse. I was at least able to collect the corpses of the other 2, and I've already delivered the ash urn of one person to his family. As for the ash urn of the other person, that's the purpose of my trip to Azure Phoenix Nation. It was no wonder that the big-bearded martial artist had twice told Zhang Shanfeng and Chun Ping'an to leave the old residence as quickly as possible. Brother Su, you're a chivalrous man. Do you regret the decision you made back then? Chun Ping'an suddenly asked. The big-bearded martial artist lowered his head and dejectedly took a few sips of wine. After raising his head, he pursed his lips and said, My friends have already died, so I have no idea if they regret their decisions or not. But as the sole survivor, I regret it to death. This was possibly the first time that the gallant and proud martial artist had spoken in such a dejected and ungallant manner. Chun Ping'an didn't explicitly say whether he wanted to stay or leave. During his trip to Great Sui Nation with Li Baoping and the others, he had always been the one making the decisions out of necessity. Moreover, he hadn't been allowed to show any weakness or hesitation. Now that he was traveling around the world by himself, there was no longer any need for him to make decisions for others. Zhang Shanfeng was clearly at a loss, and he looked around and asked, Then what should we do? Xianxia fell silent, and he continued to take sips of wine. If we stay, and we step forward to face any challenges, how likely is it that we'll have problems protecting ourselves? Chun Ping'an asked. Xianxia carefully organized the words in his mind before replying. The biggest danger is our enemies having allies among us and using these allies to launch a surprise attack. If it were me, I would definitely use some technique to suppress the gods in the Wunchang Pavilion and the Martial Sage Temple. Moreover, it looks like the gods in the Wunchang Pavilion and the Martial Sage Temple have already become weak due to the negative effects of the old residence and the illegal temple, so it's very easy for issues to appear in these areas. Fortunately, the incense, layout, and aura of the city god temple looked fairly good to me when I visited not long ago. Can we directly look for the city god and explain the situation to him? Chun Ping'an asked. Prefectural Overseer Lu and General Ma might not understand the existence and power of these strange things. Even if they truly come across such a situation, they can likely shirk responsibility using the fancy words and explanations of politicians. However, the city god's health and situation are intricately tied to that of the prefectural city. To put things bluntly, Prefectural Overseer Lu can hide and General Ma can keep his army put, but the city god definitely can't escape. Moreover, if the demons and evil spirits are truly scheming for something, then it's almost certain that they'll target the local city god first. In this sense, the city god definitely cares about this matter more than the local officials. Xianxia's eyes lit up, and he heavily slapped his thigh and exclaimed in a solemn voice, This is a good plan. Zhang Shanfeng smiled and raised a thumb at Chun Ping'an. Someone knocked on the door at this moment, and Chun Ping'an walked over to see who it was. As it turned out, it was Lu Qiqing, Lu Gaohua, and Lu Gaohua's older sister. They had anxious expressions, and Lu Gaohua poured himself a large cup of wine after sitting down. Don't you guys find this strange? The statue of the heavenly official in the city god temple suddenly cracked apart just now, and there's even blood flowing from it and painting the floor red. Not only that, but the city god temple is also filled with snakes, rats, and scorpions. It's absolutely revolting. My father has sent people over to close the city god temple, lest the sight of these things frighten the residents of the city. There was a serious expression on Xianxia's face, and he remained silent as he exchanged a glance with Chun Ping'an and Zhang Shanfeng. What about the Wunchang Pavilion and the Martial Sage Temple? Chun Ping'an asked. Lu Gaohua faltered upon hearing this, and he shook his head and replied, I'm not sure about those 2 places. The locals don't like visiting the Wunchang Pavilion and the Martial Sage Temple, especially since there's nothing much to see in those places. Lu Gaohua's older sister was still a little uneasy around Chen Ping'an, and she only dared to sit next to Lu Qiqing, as far as she could from the young boy. Her voice was soft and mellow as she said, "When I was taking some tea to father, I coincidentally heard him mention something to an elderly Taoist guest. Even though the Wunchang Pavilion and the Martial Sage Temple enjoy a lot of incense and offerings, these incense and offerings are regarded as things that are offered but not accepted." The elderly Taoist priest also felt helpless about this, and he said that there was nothing the imperial court could do about this situation. Colorful Garment Nation is only so big, so it's impossible for an additional formal mountain god to be appointed. He also said that if a prodigious scholar from Blusher Prefecture managed to enter Lakeview Academy, the feng shui of this place might potentially improve. My father sighed and shook his head when he heard this, and he said that Blusher Prefecture didn't have the ability to invite such an impressive scholar over. Lu Qiqing was stumped, and he asked with a puzzled expression, "What are you guys talking about? What Wunchang Pavilion and Martial Sage Temple? What formal mountain god? However, I am familiar with Lakeview Academy. It's next to the border of White Mountain Nation, and I've visited and gone inside the academy several times. Can I be considered somewhat of a prodigious scholar then? Rest assured, Miss Lu, Lakeview Academy recruits one scholar from White Mountain Nation each year, and this can be considered special treatment toward White Mountain Nation. One day, perhaps I can also." Lu Gaohua rolled his eyes and snapped, "Give it a rest? Why don't you? You're barely more knowledgeable than me." Lu Qiqing huffed and shut his mouth. His jumbled knowledge from the different teachings was effective against women but not very useful against fellow scholars. After chatting for a while, Lu Gaohua and his older sister took their leave first. Before leaving, Lu Gaohua recalled something and warned, "Judging from what my father said, while we were at the city god temple just then, the entire prefectural city will go under martial law starting from tomorrow. It will be easy to leave but difficult to enter. However, it's entirely possible that it will become difficult to leave as well after a while. Because of this, Lu Qiqing has decided to leave the city tomorrow. What about the three of you? Let me say this first. If the city truly goes under martial law tomorrow, then General Ma will definitely be involved in it. At that time, I won't be able to help you even if I'm the prefectural overseer's son. So, if you want to leave, you should do so by tomorrow night at the latest." Lu Qiqing had already walked out with Lu Gaohua's older sister. They were reluctantly farewelling each other in Zhang Shanfeng's room, and they thankfully didn't get too lovey-dovey with each other because Lu Gaohua was still standing there and waiting for them. After Su Yuanxia closed the door, he lightly tapped the table with his fingers and said, "It's almost certain that the city god temple has already been negatively affected. By the looks of it, these demons and heretical cultivators are scheming something big. I wonder if the cultivation base of Blusher Prefecture's city god has fallen, and if those people have trapped him inside the city god temple using some underhanded method. Or perhaps he's already been killed. The situation is dire right now, but things are also becoming clearer and clearer. The prefectural overseer and the nearby army should be on high alert as well. If we warn them about the situation now, our credibility will be much higher than before." Zhang Shanfeng looked at Chen Ping'an and asked in a hesitant voice, "Maybe we should warn the prefectural overseer before leaving?" Chen Ping'an nodded and replied, "You and Brother Su can leave with Lu Gaohua to warn the prefectural overseer about the situation. I'm going to take a trip to the city god temple to verify the situation. The earlier we learn of the truth, even if it's only a small slice of the truth, the more beneficial it will be to our decision-making." Zhang Shanfeng wasn't confused about the need to split up. However, he couldn't understand why it was Chen Ping'an heading over to the Danger City God Temple instead of him. Chen Ping'an smiled and explained, "Bivalrus Su needs to draw his saber, and it's best that he can summon gusts of fierce winds as well. This can demonstrate his status as a martial arts grandmaster. Meanwhile, you need to have your peachwood sword fly through the air, so that you can prove your identity as a Taoist priest from Mount Longhu. This will demonstrate your ability to slay demons and subdue fiends. What will I do if I go to the prefectural office? Throw punches in front of the prefectural overseer." The big-bearded martial artist roared with laughter. Zhang Shanfeng also understood Chen Ping'an's intentions, and the young Taoist priest told him to wait for a while. He then went to his room to retrieve 3 talismans. 2 were of the lowest quality, but they were the most useful evil-detecting talismans. The yellow paper talisman would immediately self-combust upon detecting sinister auras. The final talisman was a divine movement talisman. After funneling some spiritual qi or true qi into the talisman, one could run as fast as a horse for 15 minutes. One could run on the wind without expending any energy. Chun Ping'an didn't refuse these talismans, and he placed them inside his sleeve. "Aren't you afraid that I'll run away?" he asked in amusement. The young Taoist priest widened his eyes and exclaimed, "Chun Ping'an, you can't do that." Chun Ping'an hurriedly shook his hands. Zhang Shanfeng started to chuckle to himself. If Chun Ping'an fled, Zhang Shanfeng would indeed feel sad about losing that expensive divine movement talisman. However, he would feel even sadder about losing a good friend. The three of them parted ways at the entrance of the inn. Su Yuanxia left with Zhang Shanfeng, and they followed Lu Gaohua to the prefectural office located in the west of the prefectural city. Chun Ping'an was coincidentally heading in the same direction as the impoverished scholar, Lu Qiqing. One was heading to the city gate in the east, while one was heading to the city god temple in the northeast. Miss Lu wasn't present, so Lu Qiqing no longer conducted himself as a scholar. He lowered his head and bowed his back as he walked beside Chun Ping'an, and he asked in curiosity, "Young Master Chun, are you a legendary martial arts grandmaster? Even though you're young and have only just entered the cultivation world, perhaps you're already a paramount elite because of your supreme talent and impressive background? Is it because of this that your slap was so quick and ethereal that night? In fact, I was completely unable to detect your attack. Can this be viewed as reaching a divine level? As long as it's a martial artist attacking you, you naturally won't be able to detect their attack." Chun Ping'an replied in exasperation. As if suffering great humiliation, Lu Qiqing exclaimed, "That's impossible. Young Master Chun is definitely a martial arts grandmaster hidden in the mortal cities. If I were to hazard a guess, perhaps you're the final disciple of Colorful Garment Nation's sword god who's renowned in several neighboring nations. Otherwise, who carries two swords with them when they're traveling outside? One of them is Illuminating Sun, the sword used by the sword god while he traveled around the world back then. Am I correct? Can I touch it?" Chun Ping'an was quite impressed by this person's imagination. However, he was unwilling to speak nonsense with him, so he put on a stern expression and replied with a nod. "Yes, this is Illuminating Sun, so you need to be careful. My case is filled with razor-sharp sword chi, so you'll immediately be wounded by them once you take the sword out. Are you afraid?" "No, I'm not afraid," Lu Qiqing said with a shake of his head. He had initially wanted to touch the sword case, but his hands were now obediently clasped behind his back. After the two of them parted ways, Lu Qiqing continued to walk along the street toward the east gate of the prefectural city. The frail scholar suddenly raised his head and glanced at a figure standing atop the city wall. It was none other than the old immortal who had performed on the tall stage in the middle of the lake. The armored General Ma was standing beside him at this moment, and there were two other elderly but unfamiliar faces standing next to them. The old immortal was pointing at places around the prefectural city. Lu Qiqing clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, "Inviting a thief into the house, but completely oblivious to the fact." Elsewhere, it wasn't long before Chun Ping'an arrived at the square outside the city god temple. He focused his gaze, yet he was unable to detect anything because he wasn't a chi refiner. However, his instinct as a pure martial artist told him that there was an extra hint of bloodshed and darkness surrounding the city god temple that had red walls, green roofs, and a glazed top. It no longer appeared as peaceful and tranquil as his first visit. This was analogous to someone tossing a piece of charcoal onto a snow-covered ground. Perhaps ordinary passers-by wouldn't notice anything out of the ordinary, but those with good vision and keen observation would definitely see the piece of charcoal. Moreover, it would appear especially jarring. There were soldiers from the prefectural office standing guard outside the city god temple, and they prohibited people from entering the temple to offer incense. Chun Ping'an took a deep breath before looking around and finding a relatively secluded wall. He snuck over and retrieved an evil-detecting talisman. After arriving there, he leaped over the wall when no one was looking. Upon landing inside the city god temple, the evil-detecting talisman between his fingers immediately self-combusted and burned to a crisp. There was no need to verify anything else. It was already abundantly clear that this was the doing of demons and evil spirits. Chun Ping'an grabbed his sword-nurturing gourd and took a large swig of wine. At the same time, he reached behind his back and patted the wooden case. The locust wood sword was called Eliminating Fiends, and the sword that Master Wan had forged was temporarily called Subduing Demons. Regardless of how much the little boy in azure and the little girl in pink looked down on these names, saying that they were common and basic, Chun Ping'an felt like the names Subduing Demons and Eliminating Fiends were very good. Since he had chosen such good names for these swords, he naturally couldn't let them down. Chun Ping'an used his foot to gently flick away a venomous snake that was furiously slithering over. His movements appeared gentle and calm, yet the bones and flesh of the venomous snake immediately shattered in midair. Right now, Chun Ping'an's focus was on the two colorful clay statues of heavenly officials that were standing outside the red lacquer gate of the hall. One stood to the left and one stood to the right, and blood streamed down both of them. There were countless multicolored venomous snakes slithering over them, and there were also palm-sized pitch-black scorpions resting on their heads and arms and showing off their strength. In fact, there were even rats wantonly scuttling in and out of the clay statues' broken abdomens and faces. Chun Ping'an was involuntarily reminded of the terrible state of the immortal tomb in his hometown. He was instantly infuriated, and he slowly walked over following the direction of the wall. He tried his best to calm his breath and remain composed. After all, being angry wouldn't increase one's strength, nor would it allow one's true chi to circulate quicker. As he advanced, Chun Ping'an quietly said in his mind, "Chun Ping'an, if you truly can't defeat them, then you need to flee as quickly as you can." Shun Wan was the name of the city god honored in Blusher Prefecture's city god pavilion. Before his death, he was an official from the censorate, and he was renowned in the imperial court for his integrity and upright manner. He had also spoken the famous words, "A loyal official during life, an upright ghost after death." 1. It was already 300 years since his death, yet he still enjoyed abundant incense and offerings. Because Chun Ping'an had visited the city god temple with Su Yuanxia and Zhang Shanfeng before, he was quite familiar with the paths and locations of everything. There were 4 separate halls in the city god pavilion, and 2 painted clay statues of heavenly officials were standing in front of the first gate inside the temple. They had initially appeared mighty and impressive, yet they were in a miserable state at this moment with snakes, rats, and other vermin all over them. Chun Ping'an walked next to the exterior wall of the temple for a few dozen paces, but he was yet to encounter any demons or sinister spirits. He didn't hesitate anymore and pulled out a yang energy illumination talisman from his sleeve. The talisman hovered an arm's length in front of him, and it gently swayed back and forth, then automatically flew toward the gate as Chun Ping'an took a step forward. Chun Ping'an immediately felt much more at ease. Even though the city god pavilion had been attacked, and the city god temple square was ruined beyond recognition, there was definitely still remnant spiritual energy flowing through the buildings at the back of the temple. Otherwise, the illumination talisman wouldn't have flown forward by itself. Instead, it would have retreated toward the walls. The illumination talisman radiated with a soft yellow glow, and the pure light enveloped Chun Ping'an's entire body. Wherever he walked, the centipedes, scorpions, and other poisonous vermin on the ground would quickly scuttle away. When Chun Ping'an walked past the first internal gate, the vermin on the 2 clay statues of heavenly officials were most likely affected by the radiance of this illumination talisman as well. The vermin all crawled to the statues' backs or hid inside the statues' hollow abdomens. Chun Ping'an held his breath and gathered his concentration. He slowly continued forward. Behind the first internal gate was the Great Hall with a plaque. The deity honored inside this hall wasn't the city god, but instead a general who had played an important role in the founding of colorful Garment Nation. The statue of the general was seated, and there were 8 statues of subordinate officials standing to the 2 sides. The golden characters on the plaque had been personally written by the founding emperor of colorful Garment Nation, and more than half of the golden ink had already been chipped off. There was a black snake as thick as a bowl resting coiled on top of the plaque. Its head was hanging down, and it looked at Chun Ping'an and hissed at him as if showing off its might and warning him away. When Chun Ping'an stepped inside the great hall, the black snake suddenly shot over and widened its maw. However, Chun Ping'an twisted his body and turned to the side without even looking up. He then grabbed the head of the black snake with his hand and gently flicked his wrist. The black snake instantly became limp as if it had no bones. Chun Ping'an threw it away, and by the time it hit the ground, it was already as dead as could be. Chun Ping'an followed the swaying illumination talisman forward. After passing the hall, there was another square that was smaller than the first one. There were old trees all around, and there was a stone tablet that recorded the Emperor of Colorful Garment Nation's imperial edict to appoint a city god. The last time Chun Ping'an had come here, he had actually stood in front of this stone tablet and examined it for half a day. In the end, he had come to a single conclusion. The handwriting was truly mediocre, even inferior to the handwriting of the young Chui Chan. Fortunately, the young Chui Chan, or rather Chui Dongshan, wasn't present. Otherwise, he would definitely be angered by Chun Ping'an's observation. There was a God of Wealth Hall and a Tai Sui Hall too to the left and right of the square. People could pray for fortune and wealth in the former hall, and they could pray for peace and safety in the latter. The residents in the city were probably more sincere when they prayed in these halls compared to the Great Hall. The illumination talisman continued to fly forward, and Chun Ping'an continued to follow closely behind it. However, after a few moments he suddenly turned around. He felt like a white shadow had flashed across the large stone tablet under the old cypress tree just then. The silvery voices of young women traveled out from the God of Wealth Hall and the Tai Sui Hall. Their voices were extremely faint, and it sounded as if they were joking and giggling with each other. However, there was also a hint of chilliness behind their charming voices. It was as if they were female ghosts in the Yin dimension transmitting their voices to the Yang dimension, with their voices slowly seeping through the boundary between Yin and Yang bit by bit. Borrowing the shade provided by the old cypress trees, the voices of these women floated through the windows of the two halls and entered the square between them. However, their voices melted like snow upon coming into contact with the scattered sunlight, so they became much softer than they initially were. However, Chun Ping'an was still able to vaguely hear them. Chun Ping'an furrowed his brows as he turned around and continued forward. The main hall of the city god pavilion was only a dozen or so steps in front of him. This was the city god hall where Shen Wan was honored. The twin swords in his wooden scabbard were more for show right now. The two bonded flying swords in his sword-nurturing gourd were his main fighting force apart from his fists. In terms of other external items, Chun Ping'an also had some talismans that were similar to the illumination talisman. These talismans had come from the ancient book that Li Shixing had given him, the authentic death-avoiding book. He had 2 gold-colored treasure pagoda demon-suppressing talismans, and he had drawn these talismans just in case after destroying the Yin entity in the oil paper umbrella back at the old residence. Chun Ping'an had wanted to use them during his battle with the tree spirit from ancient Elm Nation afterward, but the tree spirit had been defeated by 1st and 15th before he had found the opportunity to do so. Apart from this, Chun Ping'an also had 1 Yang Energy Illumination Talisman and 3 Land Shortening Talismans. The latter could be used to assist his deity drumming technique, and it could of course be used to flee from danger as well. His land-shortening talismans were definitely no inferior to Zhang Shanfeng's divine movement talismans. The instant that Chun Ping'an turned back around, a woman in white appeared on top of the stone tablet. She was sitting there with her hair disheveled and covering her face. She extended a finger that was all bone and no flesh, and she gently tapped the top of the stone tablet. A spring instantly burst forth, not with water but with bright red blood. The blood flowed down the tablet, and it wasn't long before the 1,000 or so ancient characters on the stone tablet became blood red. It was as if the stone tablet had transformed into a blood letter. Strangely, however, the white dress of the woman remained spotless and unsoiled. There wasn't a single drop of blood on it. With her hair still covering her face, the woman looked up and started to sing in a melodious voice. Perhaps this was an ancient ballad from colorful Garment Nation that had already been lost with time, and the woman extended 2 bony fingers to twirl her hair as she sang in a low voice. She gently swayed her legs, and there was some blood and flesh on her bare feet, in contrast to her fleshless hands. As her feet swung back and forth, the blood flowing down the stone tablet also splashed into the surroundings. Compared to the indistinct chattering and laughter from the God of Wealth Hall and the Tai Sui Hall, the voice of the singing woman in white was far louder and clearer. The old cypress tree above her rustled in the wind as if it were singing in harmony with her. The woman in white seemingly reached a joyful part of the song, so she raised her bony hand to gently play with her hair again. The tightly shut doors of the God of Wealth Hall and the Tai Sui Hall suddenly creaked open at this moment. A person stumbled out from each hall, and the person from the God of Wealth Hall was a young man who had one arm cleaved off at the shoulder. However, his bleeding had already stopped, and there was an azure sword in his remaining hand. His face was deathly pale, and there was no sign of life or emotion in his eyes. The person from the Tai Sui Hall was a middle-aged man in azure. His head was hanging as he limped out of the hall, and upon closer inspection, it became apparent that his head had almost been chopped off by someone using a sharp weapon. In fact, his head was only held to his body by a sliver of flesh and skin. The woman in white sitting on top of the stone tablet rotated her wrists, causing the movements of the 2 stumbling men to instantly become smooth and agile. They started to dance in the square. As it turned out, there were numerous transparent threads attached to the fingertips of the woman's bony hands. These threads were like spiderwebs, and they were wrapped around the limbs of the 2 dead men and controlling their each and every movement. At the same time, Women in white continued to appear from the two halls which now had their doors wide open. They exited with clouds of black smoke behind them, and they continued to rapidly hover around the doors of the halls. They quietly giggled as they looked at the two men, and their faces were filled with expressions of taunting and hatred. However, the scattered rays of sunshine were like a natural barrier that they didn't dare to recklessly cross. Even so, there were still 4 or 5 women in white who couldn't suppress their urge. They rapidly dashed forward with clouds of black smoke behind them, and they quickly flew around and circled the corpses of the two men. While doing so, they used their fingers to toy with the deathly pale faces of the two men. They would shuffle behind the two men at times, and they would also dash up from under the two men at other times. However, the price they paid for this short moment of joy was being brutally disintegrated by the sunlight. Chun Ping'an stood at the door threshold of the main hall, as if the Yang Energy Illumination Talisman had run into a brick wall that prevented it from advancing forward. It dashed forward and came to an abrupt halt again and again, and it was unable to advance forward no matter what. The Yang Energy in the yellow paper talisman continued to drain away. Chun Ping'an held his hand out, and it was as if his palm were resting against the frozen surface of a lake in winter. He pushed harder, yet he was still unable to break through the barrier. Chun Ping'an put his index finger and middle finger together. As he turned around, he viciously flicked his wrist and caused the illumination talisman that had little spiritual energy remaining to rapidly shoot toward the square. The talisman spun around the 2 puppet corpses once, and the 2 deceased men collapsed to the ground with a loud thud. The transparent threads attached to their bodies were severed, and blood started to stream from their bodies after they collapsed to the ground. The woman in white retracted her hands. She wasn't angered, and it was instead the women who had exited the 2 halls who waved their arms and bared their teeth at Chun Ping'an. There was deep hatred in their eyes as they glared at him. Regardless of how kind a person was during their life, they could no longer be viewed through the second sage's lens of fundamental goodness once they became an evil spirit. Just like how bamboo baskets couldn't collect water, such evil spirits couldn't maintain kindness any longer. This was the intangible and undetectable will of the heavens. Chun Ping'an looked toward the back of the woman on the stone tablet and said in a soft voice, "Young lady, we should show some basic respect toward deceased people. No matter what kind of hostility existed between you and them back then, why not let bygones be bygones?" The woman in white ignored him and continued to sing. However, she used the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent this time, and this was something that Chun Ping'an could understand. A form like a withered husk, a heart like extinguished ashes, true knowledge he possesses, yet free from conceit he remains. Confused he appears, and no schemes can penetrate his heart. Oh, what kind of person is he? 3. The woman's voice was calm, and it surprisingly possessed a sense of tranquility and peacefulness. There was no hint of anger or hatred at all. Chun Ping'an could understand the words, but he couldn't understand the deeper meaning behind the words. In any case, he wasn't in the mood to mull over this either. The main hall of the city god pavilion was sealed off from the outside world using some kind of formation, and it was very likely that the city god was trapped inside. This prevented him from patrolling the prefectural city and helping Blusher Prefecture overcome the imminent calamity. The main hall behind Chun Ping'an was the city god hall where city god Shin 1 and 2 other gods were honored. The statue of Shin 1 was more than 9 meters tall, and visitors needed to raise their heads to gaze up at him. To his left and right were the statues of a scholarly god and a martial god who were both 6 meters tall. They were holding an official seal and a steel truncheon, respectively. According to rumors, a Taoist priest with the surname Zhang had come here from another continent more than 200 years ago. He had come to some realization after experiencing the simple and honest nature of Blusher Prefecture, and after returning home, it wasn't long before Mount Longhu's heavenly master residence had bestowed the colorful Garment Nation Blusher Prefecture City God Protection Seal upon colorful Garment Nation. Only then did people find out that the young Taoist priest had actually been esteemed Taoist Huangzi from Mount Longhu's heavenly master residence. This enthralling story spread through half of the continent, and it was rumored that the gold seal was now secretly stored in the imperial treasury of colorful Garment Nation. There was also a giant mural that illustrated 81 beautiful women dancing with large sleeves. People praised this mural as ink that seems alive, and just a single breath away from coming alive. Chun Ping'an didn't say anything else after seeing the woman in white ignore his words. He quietly patted the sword-nurturing gourd on his waist. After doing this, he turned around and threw a punch at the frozen surface, sealing off the city god hall. Ripples danced across the seal formation, and the 3 statues inside the main hall also appeared to shudder. Chen Ping'an slowly walked using the 6-step walking meditation stance as he threw punch after punch at the seal formation. He was using none other than the deity drumming technique. Of course, he was also on guard against any sudden attacks from the women in the square. A sigh traveled over from atop an old and towering cypress tree, and a young girl said, "Idiot, that's a seal formation formed by 2 powerful cultivators at the 5th tier. Even my master won't be able to shatter it in a short amount of time. Otherwise, how can the city god still be trapped inside? Yet, you want to forcefully shatter it with a martial arts technique? Save yourself some strength and leave this place before the female ghosts develop killing intent toward you. Otherwise, you'll be the corpse puppet dancing around the next time some fool comes barging in." Perhaps Chen Ping'an's punches were far too casual in her eyes, so they were unable to give off any sense of power or might. This caused the strange young girl atop the cypress tree to look down on him. After his fight with Ma Kuxuan in the street, Chen Ping'an's fist intent was increasingly hidden now. He also performed walking meditation slower than before, and his manner of walking was more aligned with the notion of nourishment. The reason why many low-level martial arts techniques would end up cursing their own body for its deficiencies was that they were chaotic and unrefined. Thus, the more diligently they trained, the more they would damage their body and soul. However, even though Chen Ping'an's physical movements were slower when he performed walking meditation, his circulation of qi was countless times quicker than before when he performed standing meditation. If his circulation of qi were compared to the delivery of letters from relay stations, then his speed had only been that of a single quick horse before. Now, however, it was the speed of several quick horses running in relay for. This nature of concealing his fist intent was extremely mystical, and it was something that definitely couldn't be detected by martial artists under the 6th or 7th tier. The woman in white suddenly stopped singing. She turned around and stared intently at Chen Ping'an's 18th punch. The young boy's fist surged forward like the ringing of a large bell, and the aura of the entire square was shaken into action. A fracturing sound instantly rang out from the blood-soaked stone tablet. The woman in white unleashed a high-pitched shriek that could pierce through one's eardrums. It was as if she were a general issuing a command, and the hovering young women in front of the 2 halls immediately transformed into 2 columns of surging black smoke. One column fused into the seal formation and used the remnant souls of the young women to fortify the formation, while one column surged toward Chen Ping'an and tried its utmost to interrupt his flowing fist intent. It tried to stop him from throwing the 19th punch using the deity drumming technique. "You reckless fool, you'll drag me to my death. If I die here today, then see how I scold you to death when we meet again on the path to the afterlife. But we would already be dead. Damn. I haven't died yet and you're pissing me off to death." The young girl finished her angry grumbling atop the old cypress tree. She didn't hesitate anymore. She dashed forward, producing a series of crisp, tinkling sounds. The sounds circulated around her, and they also gave rise to rings of faint golden flowers. Her lithe figure was truly pleasing to the eye. Hidden under her thick hair, the corners of the woman in white's lips curled up into a slight smile. There was a cold and mocking look in her eyes. She extended her bony hands and clapped them together. Inside the main hall of the city god pavilion, the scholarly god and the martial god to the left and right of city god Shin creaked and groaned as if coming to life. Huge amounts of dust were shaken off their bodies, and they both took a step forward and walked down from their platform. There was a loud boom as their feet stomped onto the bluestone floor of the main hall. The 2 clay statues strode forward and charged toward the door, with the martial god raising his steel truncheon and smashing it down at Chen Ping'an's head. Meanwhile, the scholarly god who was holding an iron essence official seal strode out the door without hesitation. It raised its iron seal and thrust it toward the slender young girl. Initially, shattering the seal formation on the main hall should have returned freedom to the city god. This would have been the most logical progression of events. Unexpectedly, however, the true killing intent wasn't coming from the square in front of the city god hall, nor was it coming from the menacing women in white who were filled with eerie energy. Instead, it was coming from inside the city god hall where their hopes and helpers should have been. Then, where in the world was city god Shin? Where was his godly body? The tallest and mightiest clay statue inside the city god hall was the initially golden and dazzling statue of the city god. It was dull and devoid of luster now, and the ground surrounding it was filled with golden shards. Only a few specks of gold remained in its eyes. If the locals of Blusher Prefecture were present, They most likely wouldn't dare to believe that this was the golden city god of Blusher Prefecture that they were all extremely proud of. This was because according to the local county chronicle of Blusher Prefecture, gold leaf worth almost 100 taels of gold had been used to gild the statue of the city god. In order to achieve this, the prefectural overseer of that generation had begged the wealthy forces and clans in the prefecture for help. After successfully raising enough money, he had specially asked someone to carve a merit tablet to record the names and clans of those people who had helped. The statue of the city god that was now missing almost all of its gold exterior spoke with great difficulty. Its hoarse voice traveled over to the door threshold, saying, "Hurry up and leave, you two. There are many demonic and heretical cultivators with unknown backgrounds in the prefecture, but there are only the female ghosts in white here. If the two of you manage to escape, you definitely have to look for the esteemed immortals from Divine Edict Sect or the noble scholars or virtuous scholars from Lakeview Academy. Tell them that Colorful Garment Nation is facing a great catastrophe. If Colorful Garment Nation falls, then none of the 6 surrounding nations, including Ancient Elm Nation, will be spared." As it turned out, the city god pavilion meant to protect the residents of the prefectural city was barely able to protect itself at the moment. Outside the main hall, the young girl who had bells tied to her arms and legs helped Chun Ping'an block the column of black smoke formed by the female ghosts in white. As her 4 bells sounded, countless faint golden flowers bloomed in the air, creating a dazzling scene. The fearsome column of black smoke was immediately sliced up and shattered into pieces. However, the young girl was also struck by several wisps of chaotic black smoke. She vomited blood, yet she still refused to retreat. She stood near the reckless fool and lightly shook her wrist. Her bells chimed, and golden flowers bloomed, continuing to disintegrate the wisps of smoke that were echoing with wails of agony. As she did this, Chun Ping'an calmly threw his 19th punch. The other column of black smoke ferociously surged into the icy surface that was sealing the main hall off from the outside world. It helped the seal formation block the accumulated might of the 19th punch of the deity drumming technique. At the same time, the 2 traitorous statues of the scholarly god and the martial god continued to attack Chun Ping'an and the young girl. The martial god continued to swing its steel truncheon at Chun Ping'an's head, while the scholarly god continued to thrust its official seal toward the back of the young girl's head. Chun Ping'an was unfazed, and he quickly threw his 20th punch in quick succession. The seal formation shuddered violently. Even though it was yet to shatter, it was already showing signs of buckling under pressure. Could only withstand 1 more punch at most. However, there was a feeling of helplessness and exasperation in Chun Ping'an's mind. He could no longer throw the 21st punch of the deity drumming technique. After all, he couldn't stand idly by and watch the young girl be smacked to death by the official seal of the scholarly god. Could he? Otherwise, he did indeed have the opportunity to throw the 21st punch. The stone tiles under Chun Ping'an's feet cracked under pressure as he suddenly disappeared and dodged the strike from the martial god's steel truncheon. He instantly arrived beside the scholarly god, and he used the heavy cavalry formation shattering technique to throw a punch at the clay statue's waist. This was a life-saving punch, so Chun Ping'an didn't dare to hold back at all. Because of this, snow-white fist intent swirled around his arm as his fist surged forward. A fearsome fist aura was formed, and there was also the vague sound of ferocious wind and lightning. The 6-meter-tall clay statue was forced to step sideways after being struck by Chun Ping'an's powerful punch. Its large feet carved a deep trench into the ground. The young girl turned around to see what was going on after hearing the commotion behind her. Only then did she roughly understand the situation. There was a slightly dazed expression on her face when she looked at the unremarkable young boy with the wooden scabbard on his back again. Chun Ping'an paid no heed to the young girl's thoughts, and he paused the movements of his arms as if he were preparing to throw another punch. However, he retrieved 2 gold-colored Treasure Pagoda demon-suppressing talismans from his sleeves instead, and he secretly stuck these talismans to his palm. The steel truncheon in the martial god's hand missed its target and obliterated the stone tiles on the ground instead. The martial god straightened his back and swung his steel truncheon at Chun Ping'an again. Chun Ping'an had practiced his slow-paced walking meditation countless times during his journey down south. However, when he wanted to be quick, he could genuinely be very quick. The steel truncheon missed again, and Chun Ping'an had already arrived in front of the clay statue of the martial god at some unknown time. With a tap of his feet, he leaped up and forcefully struck the forehead of the martial god with his palm. There was dazzling golden light. A golden Treasure Pagoda materialized around the clay statue of the martial god. It was slightly taller and larger than the martial god, and arcs of lightning flashed through the pagoda like countless soaring dragons. It was as if the clay statue were being enshrined inside the treasure pagoda. Just what kind of feeling was this? This could be determined by observing the shattering body of the large clay statue. Regardless of how the martial god struggled, and how ferociously he attacked the treasure pagoda with his steel truncheon, the treasure pagoda demon-suppressing talisman remained firm and unwavering as it suppressed him. Immediately after using the first gold-colored treasure pagoda demon-suppressing talisman, Chun Ping'an had thrust his feet into the martial god's chest and used him as a platform to leap toward the scholarly god. In a flash, he arrived before the scholarly god who was rapidly charging toward the young girl. With another smack, he stuck the remaining gold-colored talisman onto the iron essence official seal of the scholarly god. The towering clay statue bent its knees as if a mountain was bearing down on it. Shards of clay continued to break free from its knees, and it was almost forced to stumble forward and fall to the ground. Chun Ping'an's feet were yet to touch the ground. After using his 2 dazzling golden talismans, he continued to soar upward, all the way until he reached the clay statue's head. He stood on the head of the scholarly god and looked toward the woman in white who was standing atop the stone tablet. Chun Ping'an didn't pause, and he charged toward the stone tablet under the old cypress tree, as if he was running on the wind. While soaring through the air, he reached behind his back and lightly patted his sword case, saying in a quiet voice, "Eliminating fiends!" The locust-wood sword flew out of the case and landed in Chun Ping'an's hand. Chun Ping'an swung his sword down. His movements were smooth and completed in a single breath, and he appeared fairly carefree and dashing. 1. A quote from Feng Xiaoru's Ranglun. Feng Xiaoru was a Chinese official and Confucian scholar of the Ming dynasty. 2. Tai Sui is a Chinese name for stars directly opposite the planet Jupiter in its roughly 12-year orbital cycle. Personified as deities, they are important features of Chinese astrology, feng shui, and Taoism. 3. An extract from Zhuangzi's Knowledge Rambling in the North. This extract describes a knowledgeable person who is free from conceit and unmoved by desires or vested interests. 4. This references the method of delivering letters/messages in the past. Over long distances, swapping to a new horse at each relay station will naturally result in a quicker speed than simply using the same horse. Chun Ping'an swung his locust-wood sword down at the woman in white standing on top of the stone tablet. He didn't utilize any sword technique or sword stance, and there was no spiritual glow on the locust-wood sword capable of suppressing entities either. The woman in white, whose face was covered by her thick hair, pursed her lips. Even though she looked down on her opponent, she was still unwilling to be too careless because the young boy had successfully suppressed the 2 clay statues of the martial god and the scholarly god just then. She decided to play with him for a while. In any case, maintaining control of the city god pavilion would naturally be best, but losing control of it wouldn't matter too much either. After all, there would always be more powerful allies to snatch it back. She reached down and quickly ran her hand along her waist, retrieving a long sword that had no scabbard. The sword was blood red, and it was filled with a repulsive aura. She had most likely concealed this sword using an illusion technique. When she ran her bony palm across the sword, a trail of sparks flew into the air as she made contact with its blade. Not only that, but an emerald green bracelet also slipped off her wrist and started to rapidly circle around her. Its path was unpredictable, and it was so fast that it quickly became a blur, leaving an emerald green trail behind it in the air. For cultivators in the world, it was naturally the case that the more immortal treasures the better. This was the same concept as commoners wanting as much money as possible. No one would complain about having too much wealth. However, genuine spirit tools and immortal tools were far too rare and precious. If a person was lucky enough to possess 2, then they would try their utmost to have one for offense and have one for defense. One could be used to attack enemies and force them back, and one could be used to defend oneself and keep oneself safe. With an offensive treasure to attack and a defensive treasure to guard, this would naturally be a flawless combination. For example, the militarian armor pellet used by the tree spirit in the old residence. The armor pellet could transform into a suit of radiant armor, a top-notch defensive immortal treasure. Right now, the woman in white was following this exact principle. She had a blood-red sword and an emerald green bracelet, and the former was used for offense while the latter was used for defense. In fact, all of Chun Ping'an's actions had taken place in but the blink of an eye, from forcefully suppressing the clay statues of the martial god and the scholarly god using strange and extremely high-quality talismans, to stepping on the scholarly god's head, to finally lunging over and attacking with his locust wood sword. The locust wood sword instantly arrived in front of the woman. The woman in white quickly raised her sword and slashed sideways, causing a burst of blood-red sword chi to materialize above her head. If the young boy didn't dodge in time, then this burst of sword chi would definitely hack him into two at the waist. However, the young boy suddenly vanished from sight. Inch movement talisman. The woman in white knew that the situation was bad. The sound of steel striking stone suddenly reverberated around the square without any warning. After that, a string of clanging sounds rang out as concentrated and rapid as raindrops from a torrential downpour striking a roof. The expression of the woman in white changed slightly. She twisted her hips, and she quickly flew away from the top of the stone tablet. She circled the lush green cypress tree with her blood-red sword, and it was as if she were hiding from something. She also purposely distanced herself from the emerald green bracelet. There were approximately 6 meters between her and the bracelet, and this would allow her to freely control it while also avoiding any attacks. It was a flying sword. The young boy was actually a sword cultivator who could control a flying sword. What wooden sword? What eliminating fiends? These were all covers used to trick people. His true killing blow was that cunning flying sword that was yet to reveal its true appearance. He was young, yet his mind was truly meticulous and malicious. No wonder he had successfully become a sword cultivator, the most difficult cultivation path for chi refiners. The woman in white felt extremely pained as she listened to the ceaseless clanging sounds ringing around the square. No matter how much spiritual energy her bracelet possessed, it would still be unable to withstand such brutal bullying from the flying sword. This was no different from ruthlessly trampling a flower underfoot. Her bracelet was called Viscous Ice 1, a high-grade spirit tool that her old ancestor had personally bestowed upon her. It wasn't known for its sturdiness, but it was rather adept at defending against surprise attacks from those so-called immortals who had attained the Tao. After all, her old ancestor had predicted long ago that their secret plan to steal the most valuable national treasure of colorful garment nation would definitely result in a bloody battle with many casualties. Chi refiners from powerful clans and forces might not be the most courageous when it came to fighting to the death, but they would definitely have countless mystical abilities and immortal treasures that had been passed down through the generations. These were things that they had to defend against. The woman in white was temporarily unable to predict the movements of Chun Pingin's flying sword. However, she didn't dare to retrieve her bracelet either. This infuriated her immensely, and she felt wrathful anger for the first time in a long while. If her bracelet was shattered in this battle, then to say nothing of her allies, she would definitely lose more than she could gain in this trip to Colorful Garment Nation. Even if they succeeded in the end, the reward that she received for her contributions would most likely be insufficient to make up for the bracelet. Her hair billowed wildly, revealing her true appearance. She was surprisingly the woman in colorful robes who had been the first to perform on the tall stage in the middle of the lake that night. She had enchanted countless men from Blusher Prefecture that night, and these men had felt deep regret that they couldn't pull her into their embrace and show her some love. Judging from this, the old immortal who had the demeanor of a transcendent being was at least one of the main masterminds behind the trouble brewing in Blusher Prefecture. However, these people were acting so openly and boldly, so how was there not a single cultivator from Colorful Garment Nation who had seen through them? Standing in the square, Chun Pingin faltered upon seeing the woman's true appearance. His expression was solemn, and he placed the locust wood sword back in the wooden scabbard. He habitually grabbed his wine gourd and took a gulp of wine. The woman in white laughed in anger when she saw that the young boy was still in the mood to drink. Her robes fluttered in the wind, revealing her wrists and feet. They were nothing but white bones. It could be envisioned that her slender body was much the same. Only her face had flesh and skin. Not only that, but her appearance was also extremely beautiful. As it turned out, she was a beautiful skeletal woman. No, she was a beautiful skeletal ghost. The woman in white felt slightly more at ease after confirming that the flying sword couldn't break through the defenses of her bracelet and soar over to attack her. That being the case, she would capture and kill the young boy first. He was seeking death, so he couldn't blame anyone else for his miserable fate. She had initially wanted to toy with him for a little while, but who could have imagined that he was actually fairly powerful? What did it matter that he was a sword cultivator? She and her allies could deal with him as long as he wasn't a transcendent and ethereal great sword immortal. Even if he were a sword immortal at the upper end of the middle 5 tiers, she and her allies would still be able to kill him if he dared to show himself in the prefectural city of Blusher Prefecture. The small square in front of the city god hall was now divided into 3 battlefields. There were 2 gold-colored treasure pagoda demon-suppressing talismans slowly grinding away the demonic chi of 2 clay statues. Shards of clay shot into the surroundings, and plumes of smoke rose around the clay statues. The sound of cracking continued to echo around the square. The clay statues of the martial god and the scholarly god were unable to break free no matter how they roared and bellowed. Arcs of lightning flashed inside the treasure pagodas formed by the demon-suppressing talismans, and it was as if heavenly lords from the thunder department were using whips of lightning to viciously strike evil beings. The 2 clay statues were firmly suppressed in the treasure pagodas. The second battlefield involved first, the flying sword that Chun Ping'an had summoned just moments back. It finally hadn't insisted on making a flashy entrance from the sword-nurturing gourd this time, instead opting to sneak in without alerting the woman in white. However, it was a pity that she possessed a defensive bracelet that had blocked that deadly strike for her, preventing her head from being separated from her body. Perhaps First had become truly angry, or perhaps it was like a child who had found a new toy. It started to ignore Chun Ping'an's thoughts, and it focused its attention on the emerald green bracelet. As if forging iron, it continued to strike the bracelet again and again. It purposely slowed down as well, and it controlled the region where the bracelet could travel. The final battlefield was naturally the one where the deadly battle between Chun Ping'an and the woman in white was taking place. The woman was determined to kill this young sword cultivator first. She charged over with her blood-red sword, and she roared at the 2 halls honoring the god of wealth and the Tai Sui at the same time. The Een entities and female ghosts itching for action immediately surged out and transformed into black smoke, blotting out heaven and earth as they rushed toward Chun Ping'an, who was standing alone in the square. The young girl with silver bells on her wrists and feet initially wanted to rush over to help Chun Ping'an, but the young boy looked at her and warned her not to become involved with his eyes. The young girl didn't act rashly, and obediently stayed put in the first battlefield. However, she gently moved her arms and feet, causing her silver bells to continuously emit ethereal rings. She used her full strength to send the faint golden flowers out from under the eaves of the main hall, and she insisted on helping Chun Ping'an exterminate the female ghosts even though her face was already deathly pale. To Chun Ping'an, the young girl's willingness to help him was already enough. He forcefully swung his arms, causing a turbulent and dazzling fist aura to flow over them. This was none other than the rain evaporation technique that Cui Chan's grandfather had taught him. His abundant aura instantly burst outward, slamming into the dozen or so female ghosts who had rushed out from the side halls and were viciously charging toward him. They were already being scorched and severely wounded by the scattered rays of sunshine, and Chun Ping'an's punch was also a domineering one that had the aura of a formidable warrior. This wounded them even further, and their sharp fingernails, which were as long as fingers, were unable to get within 3 meters of Chun Ping'an. Chun Ping'an was far more capable than just throwing a single punch. He leaned backward, and he instantly retreated several meters with a tap of his feet. He dodged the sword strike of the woman in white, yet the beautiful female bone ghost was like a parasite that wouldn't let go of him. Her feet didn't touch the ground, and she simply dashed across the air as she chased after Chun Ping'an. She thrust her sword forward. However, Chun Ping'an also took this opportunity to assume a fist stance filled with an ancient flavor and throw another 2 punches. A full dozen ghosts chaotically running around were instantly obliterated. The beautiful ghost in white started to run through the air quicker and quicker, and her hair billowed in the wind as she roared, "You truly deserve to die!" The tip of her long sword was only a few inches away from piercing through Chun Ping'an's heart. Chun Ping'an twisted his feet, and he emulated what Ma Kuxuan had done during their fight on the street. He started to spin around like a spinning top. Not only was he able to dodge the woman in white's sword strike, but he was even able to seize this opportunity to close the distance between them and throw a punch at her face. However, the beautiful ghost in white surprisingly transformed into a cloud of white mist and dispersed into the surroundings. She reappeared more than 10 meters away. She made a dragging motion with her hand, and the blood-red sword that she had left behind spun a half-circle and slashed down at Chun Ping'an's elbow. Chun Ping'an didn't hesitate to use his last-inch movement talisman. He appeared beside the beautiful ghost again, and the abundant fist aura enveloping his body made him seem like the scorching sun. The beautiful bone ghost shrieked in pain, and it no longer had the time or effort to control the blood-red sword in the distance. It used the same technique as just then, and it transformed into a cloud of white mist that quickly dispersed into the surroundings. There was a solemn and determined expression on Chun Ping'an's face, and he quietly said in his mind, "First, Even though it was unwilling, the flying sword still left its current battleground and shot through the air, directly stabbing at the beautiful female bone ghost who had only just reappeared. The emerald green bracelet and the blood-red sword faltered momentarily the instant that she disappeared for the second time, and it was as if they were hesitating because they had lost contact with their owner. The beautiful ghost finally became panicked and flustered when she noticed the flying sword shooting toward her glabella. She covered her face with her hands, and her hair also furiously curled around to protect her face. The exquisite and snow-white flying sword quietly came to a hovering stop in front of her. It didn't continue to shoot forward. A cold sensation spread across the back of her head. 1. Refers to Bingnoa, a type of jade. As if bound into place by a restriction technique, the beautiful female bone ghost stood still and didn't move at all. There was disbelief on her face, and her movements were stiff as she turned her head around after a moment. She dazedly looked at the young boy who was charging toward her. So be it if you're a sword cultivator, but why do you have 2 flying swords? And why are you disguising yourself as a pure martial artist? She could dodge first, but she couldn't dodge 15th. 1. However, Chun Ping'an remained alert and on guard even though the female ghost's neck had been sliced through from behind by 15th, his other flying sword. He paid no heed to the other entities and female ghosts, and ignored them no matter how they charged over at him. He charged over to the beautiful female bone ghost as quickly as he could, and he resolutely used the deity drumming technique to throw punch after punch. After throwing 20 punches, the bones under the white robes were smashed into smithereens. In the end, the beautiful female bone ghost exploded apart along with her white robes. A yellow paper talisman with the drawing of a female slowly drifted to the ground. The other entities and female ghost instantly lost their leader following her death, and they all rushed back inside the 2 side halls to hide. However, a fair portion of them were comprehensively disintegrated by the sun before they could flee back to the shade of the side halls. There were no longer the charming sounds of joking and giggling traveling out from the side halls, and there was instead only the sound of sobbing. The blood-red sword fell to the ground, and the emerald green bracelet was like a lost puppy as it continued to circle around the area where the beautiful female bone ghost had disappeared. Chun Ping'an stood still and didn't rush over to grab the bracelet straight away. He didn't reach over to grab the yellow paper talisman either. He looked around, and after confirming that there was no more danger, he patted the sword-nurturing gourd and had 1st and 15th fly back inside. He squatted down and carefully examined the yellow paper talisman. Chun Ping'an then retrieved the other evil-detecting talisman that Zhang Shanfeng had given him and held it near the yellow paper talisman on the ground. He waved it around, and the evil-detecting talisman did indeed self-combust. However, the flame was tiny, and it only burned a corner of the evil-detecting talisman before extinguishing. Only after seeing this did Chun Ping'an truly pick the yellow paper talisman up using his fingertips. He quickly discovered that the yellow paper talisman wasn't made from ordinary paper. The paper was incredibly smooth and soft, but it was also very tough, as if not even a strong man could tear it apart. Chun Ping'an thought for a moment, then placing the yellow paper talisman with the illustration of the beautiful woman inside his sleeve. In reality, he was placing it inside his pocket treasure. One very important reason behind the preciousness of pocket treasures was their ability to block detection from the outside world. Even though this wasn't absolute, this was roughly what the situation was like. When Chun Ping'an put the yellow paper talisman away, the emerald green bracelet also flew over to him by itself. Chun Ping'an held the evil-detecting talisman in his hand, and he saw that there wasn't any reaction at all. He reached over to grab the bracelet and placed it in his pocket treasure as well. When he walked over to retrieve the blood-red sword, however, the evil-detecting talisman immediately burst into flames and burned to a crisp. Chun Ping'an felt slightly hesitant. He could definitely sell this sword for a handsome sum of money, but he was more worried about whether it would affect 15th if he recklessly placed it inside this flying sword that doubled as a pocket treasure. In the end, Chun Ping'an grabbed the sword and looked around for a while. He then looked up at the old cypress tree next to the stone tablet. He decided to temporarily hide the sword among the dense branches and leaves, so he ran up to the tree, leapt up to the branches and concealed it there. "Sir Immortal," the young girl called timidly. Chun Ping'an, only to see the young girl pointing at the ground beside her feet. The clay statues of the martial god and the scholarly god had collapsed and shattered into countless pieces. There was a small mound there, and there were a few silver shards glimmering among the shattered clay. These shards were extremely eye-catching. However, there was something even more unexpected than this. A treasure pagoda demon-suppressing talisman was quietly hovering next to the small mound. Apart from being slightly dimmer than before, it appeared completely undamaged otherwise. It was a similar case for the other small mound of shattered clay. There were also silver shards, and the demon-suppressing talisman was also hovering next to the small mound. Like the steel truncheon of the martial god that had been obliterated by the fearsome lightning, the square official seal of the scholarly god had also been destroyed. However, there was now a small and simple-looking azure wooden box sitting there. It was just big enough to fit in the hand of a small child. Chen Ping'an was delighted, and he hurriedly jumped down the cypress tree to grab the 2 talismans and the 6 silver shards first. He placed them inside his pocket treasure. After doing this, he carefully picked up the azure wooden box radiating with a warm and gentle aura. Even though he was only holding it lightly, Chen Ping'an still felt a mysterious sense of calmness and ease. Chen Ping'an placed the small wooden box with unknown contents inside his sleeve. However, he didn't place it inside his pocket treasure. He breathed a sigh of relief. The young girl stood next to him and kept her eyes wide open as she stared at the sword immortal, who had displayed his powerful mystical abilities and slayed demons and eliminated fiends. Her master, who taught her immortal techniques in secret, had once told her that there existed many old immortals who had achieved great success in cultivation in the world. However, these old immortals had the appearance of children, and they were truly carefree and unrestricted by heaven and earth. She had witnessed many strange things today, but none of these things were stranger than the young-looking immortal in front of her. For example, how was it possible for a talisman to be preserved once it was activated? Her master was mostly a cultivator in the cultivation world and somewhat of an immortal from the mountains, and he had told her many things about immortals in the mountains and immortals outside the mountains. However, she had genuinely never heard about a reusable talisman before. Chen Ping'an had a fairly good impression of the young girl. As he walked toward the front entrance of the city god hall and prepared to use the deity drumming technique to comprehensively shatter the seal formation around the hall, he turned around and asked in a quiet voice, "This place is very dangerous, so why did you come here to begin with?" "Wow, the immortal is speaking to me. Moreover, he appears fairly friendly." The young girl was super happy, and she flicked her wrist and caused the bell on it to tinkle as she replied, "Mr. Immortal, the 4 bells on my wrists and ankles can protect me. Master said that I can last for a short while even if I'm attacked by immortals at the abode tier. However, the biggest problem about this is..." Hearing this, Chen Ping'an hurriedly shook his hands and interrupted the young girl's foolish reply. Hey, don't reveal the secrets pertaining to your immortal treasures to anyone," he warned her. "Hurry up and leave. You shouldn't stay in this place for too long. In fact, it's best if you leave the prefectural city as soon as possible." The young girl shook her head and replied, "My parents are still in the prefectural city, so I won't be going anywhere. Since I've learned some immortal techniques, I'm going to stay behind to protect them." Chen Ping'an could only drop the matter. He didn't persuade her to leave anymore, and he simply told her to stand further back. He then started to attack the seal formation with ferocious punches. His 21st punch shattered the icy surface of the seal formation with a massive explosion. Black smoke churned out, and countless wails of agony, resentment, fury, and hatred mixed together in the smoke. Chen Ping'an used the raging fist aura of the rain evaporation technique to evaporate this black smoke. Even if he missed some, they would be destroyed by the young girl standing behind him. Chen Ping'an suddenly turned around to look toward the eastern city wall. Even though he couldn't see the city gate tower clearly, he had seemingly felt some kind of gaze coming over from that direction just then. It was most likely that the destruction of the formation here had affected the formations in other places as well. Thus, the sinister masterminds behind this scheme had most likely discovered his existence. Out of an abundance of caution, Chen Ping'an retrieved his last remaining Yang Energy Illumination Talisman before stepping over the door threshold and entering the city god hall. He noticed that the young girl next to him wanted to say something, so he could only ask, "What is it? You know about something strange inside?" There was a look of embarrassment on the young girl's face, and she felt like she was perhaps a bit too naive. However, since Mr. Immortal was already asking her, she could only muster her courage and reply, "My parents said that when entering temples to offer incense, men should step over the door threshold with their left foot first, while women should step over with their right foot first." Chen Ping'an smiled and said, "Got it, thank you." He stepped over the door threshold with his left foot first and followed behind the hovering illumination talisman. He arrived beneath city god Shen Wen's clay statue. All of the golden shards on the floor had flown back to the clay statue of the city god. Between the time that Chun Ping'an shattered the seal formation and walked here, 70 or 80% of the gold guild had already returned to the statue. There was a faint golden glow radiating from the 9-meter-tall clay statue's eyes, and it was as if it was peering down at the residents of the prefecture. The city god's first words were not very polite. Before Chun Ping'an could say anything, he commanded, "Young man, hurry up and hand the Iron Essence official seal over." His words instantly angered the young girl. However, people had respected and revered the city god for many hundreds of years, so the indignant young girl didn't dare to voice her anger. She could only grumble in her mind. Chun Ping'an, on the other hand, was unperturbed. As he was about to take out the azure wooden box left over after the Iron Essence official seal disintegrated, he explained, "The official seal was already destroyed by my talisman." Chun Ping'an was only able to say half a sentence. The clay statue of the city god was enraged, and plumes of dust spread into the surroundings as he raised a foot high up into the air. The clay statue had become golden again, and its mighty appearance certainly lived up to its title of Golden City God. "Do you truly think you can act wantonly in front of me simply because you defeated a few small fry? If it weren't for 3 of them joining forces and my subordinates betraying me, how could I have been suppressed and trapped inside the city god hall? How could they have found the opportunity to act so impudently? Make haste and hand the Iron Essence official seal over to me. Don't waste any more time. The situation is dire, and I need to enter the city to suppress the demons." Before the seal formation around the city god hall was shattered, City God Shin had been busy protecting the last wisp of his divine consciousness and preventing it from being destroyed. Moreover, the seal formation filled with filth had sealed the city god hall off from the outside world, so the city god inside had naturally been unable to detect what was going on outside. In his mind, the enemy wouldn't have left any powerful subordinates here after the 3 great demons and demonic cultivators left. This was because they didn't understand the mysterious nature of this place. Because of this, the city god was only curious about how the young boy with the wooden scabbard had shattered the seal formation on the door. Perhaps he was a sect disciple who was skilled at divination and formations? No matter what, the sovereignty of Colorful Garment Nation and the life and death of the more than 100,000 residents in Blusher Prefecture were intricately linked with that item from the city god pavilion. Thus, the city god couldn't allow anything to happen to it. The giant clay statue strode off its divine platform and heavily stomped its foot 3 meters in front of Chun Ping'an. The bluestone tiles shattered into pieces as the clay statue bent down and extended a hand toward the young boy. "Hurry up and hand the official seal over." Chun Ping'an didn't move, and he asked, "Is it really that difficult to say thank you to those who helped you?" The city god faltered upon hearing this, and he tried to find the right words for a long time before eventually sighing and nodding. "I made a mistake because I was too impatient. I do indeed need to thank you." Chun Ping'an retrieved the azure wooden box and said, "The Iron Essence official seal has indeed been destroyed, and it's become one with the mound of clay remains of the scholarly god. However, it left this small wooden box behind. Is this what you're looking for?" The city god nodded slowly. Chun Ping'an tossed the wooden box high into the air. The city god caught it and said with a faint smile, "This is exactly what I'm after." Chun Ping'an turned around to leave, and the young girl immediately followed after him. However, the sound of rushing wind suddenly traveled over from behind them, and Chun Ping'an immediately knew that things were bad. He quickly channeled his true qi, which circulated several hundred kilometers around his body like a fiery dragon soaring through his meridians. The young girl, who had just reached the door threshold, was stupefied. She turned around, only to see the city god's giant leg viciously slamming into the young boy's back. The young boy was forced to bend over, and he was almost pushed to his knees. However, he forcefully held his breath and prevented the 9-meter-tall clay statue of the city god from crushing him to the floor. Chun Ping'an's face was beet red, and he said in a quivering voice, "Leave now." The young girl didn't dare to hesitate, and she hurriedly dashed out of the door and arrived in the square. Looking back, she could see wisps of pitch-black smoke drifting around the clay statue of the city god. These wisps of black smoke entered and exited the 7 orifices on his face, and the eyes of the clay statue also became an eerie faint golden color. "Be careful. The city god has fallen to demonic ways," the young girl screamed. Chun Ping'an bent his knees slightly, and he gritted his teeth. The pressure on his back continued to increase, yet he also continued to straighten his stance bit by bit. He then reached down and patted his sword nurturing gourd. At the same time, 2 gold-colored treasure pagoda demon-suppressing talismans slipped out from his sleeves. He held the talismans between his fingers, and he inadvertently glanced at his straw sandals as he looked down. He felt that things were truly satisfying and wonderful. He felt that his journey around the mortal world was truly interesting and full of spectacular encounters. He roared with laughter and exclaimed, "First and 15th, eliminate fiends with me." 1. This is a legitimate Chinese saying meaning that one can't avoid something, a bad thing such as debt collection, forever. 1st and 15th refer to days of the month on the lunar calendar. While Chun Pingyan went to the city god pavilion to check on the situation, both Su Yuanxia and Zhang Shanfeng went to the prefectural office to visit the prefectural overseer. However, they were both prepared to be turned away. To their surprise, Prefectural Overseer Lu quickly walked to the guest hall to welcome them after receiving news of their arrival from his son, Lu Gaohua. There was an anxious expression on Prefectural Overseer Lu's face, and not only did he not turn the big-bearded martial artist and the young Taoist priest away, but he didn't ask Su Yuanxia to brandish his sword and Zhang Shanfeng to manipulate his peachwood sword either. He hesitated for a moment after hearing the 2 cultivators describe the situation, and he asked the 2 of them to follow him to the main hall. Su Yuanxia and Zhang Shanfeng were both astonished when they saw the 7 or 8 people sitting in the main hall. There was a general dressed in a suit of armor with a saber across his knees. There was an elderly official pointing and gesturing at a geomantic map, and there were a few men and women who were filled with vitality and vigor. It was clear that the latter group of people were cultivators. Unless they were concealing their aura on purpose, they were all 3rd to 4th tier chi refiners. Prefectural Overseer Lu briefly introduced the people in the main hall. Most of them were powerful people from Blusher Prefecture. However, there were also outsiders who had come after learning about the situation in the prefecture. These people were similar to Su Yuanxia and the others. Su Yuanxia paid extra attention to an ordinary-looking man. His aura was calm, and he was most likely a powerful cultivator who would be calm during normal times but ferocious whenever he unleashed his power. Meanwhile, Zhang Shanfeng stole a few extra glances at a certain Taoist priest. The old Taoist priest was drinking tea in a leisurely manner right now, and a copper-armored warrior 3 meters tall was standing behind him. These kinds of warriors were unique to Taoism's talismanic branch. They were only minimally sentient and would strictly obey the simplest commands from their masters. For example, killing enemies. High-grade copper-armored warriors possessed combat power that could rival 3rd-tier martial artists, and these warriors most definitely couldn't be dismissed as just crude puppets. Prefectural Overseer Lu roughly explained the current situation to Su Yuanxia and Zhang Shanfeng, both of whom had arrived later than the others. He then sighed with emotion before cupping his fists and saying in a sincere manner, "I'm very grateful that all of you righteous people have come here to help. If we manage to navigate through this challenge, then Blusher Prefecture will definitely erect a tablet to honor all of you. Your deeds will also be recorded in the local prefecture chronicles." Almost everyone stood up to return the gesture, politely saying that it was only right for them to help. Prefectural Overseer Lu walked over to the table. There were 2 unfurled maps there, and one showed the terrain of the prefectural city while one showed all 6 prefectures of colorful garment nation. Prefectural Overseer Lu pointed at some place between Blusher Prefecture and one of the neighboring prefectures. "I just received some good news. General Ma and the Old Immortal are personally standing guard on the city wall, and 600 elite cavalrymen have already been dispatched to our prefectural city and are rushing over as quickly as they can. They'll arrive by evening today at the latest. Another 2,000 infantrymen should arrive outside the city after midnight as well." This was the first time Prefectural Overseer Lu was dealing with this kind of situation, and he was so anxious and tense that it felt as if his throat were on fire as he spoke. Moreover, he had run around everywhere in the morning, and he had been on tenterhooks the entire time. As a result, his voice was extremely hoarse as he spoke. He hurriedly accepted a cup of hot tea from his old aide. The old aide had provided plans and strategies to the prefectural office for many years and walked over to the table to help Prefectural Overseer Lu explain the situation. He pointed at several different locations and said, "We've discovered strange occurrences in 5 places so far. The City God Pavilion to the northeast, Embroidery Alley to the north, Horsehead Bridge to the south, Dangling Copper Tower to the west, and the Zhao clan residence in the center. We've already placed the City God Pavilion under emergency closure, and the 2 immortals who snuck in to investigate have yet to return. 6 people died violent deaths in Embroidery Alley, and all 32 families in the area have already been evacuated. Human-eating water demons appeared under Horsehead Bridge, and we're not sure if these demons have swum down the river and entered other areas of the city. This is quite a troublesome matter. The dangling copper tower that was used to provide warnings for immortals in the mountains has collapsed, and the old man who was responsible for guarding the tower was brutally killed. As for the Zhao clan residents, more than a dozen people have gone mad for no reason at all, and it's as if their insanity is an infectious plague. In fact, 2 of the law enforcement officers who went over to investigate the situation went mad as well. Because of this, we even had to. Prefectural Overseer Lu coughed quietly, and the old aide didn't speak any further. After all, it wouldn't be a good look for the prefectural office if news of this spread. Moreover, it was even possible that it would affect the prefectural overseer's good reputation. This was because the prefectural office had already sent people to the Zhao clan residence to seal off all exits. People inside the residence were strictly prohibited from leaving. The old Taoist priest with the Taoist title Chong Miao smiled and said, "This is a dire situation with severe consequences, so your actions are nothing if not bold and courageous, Lord Lu. You are prioritizing the safety of the more than 100,000 residents in the prefectural city, so I'm confident that people will feel deep gratitude toward your resolve and decision-making as long as they have a shred of reason and conscience." The armored general was sprawling on a chair, and he pursed his lips in a mocking manner as he shot a sideways glance at Taoist Chong Miao. Prefectural Overseer Lu felt slightly awkward, and he said in a soft voice, "I don't need them to thank me. If anything, I'll be grateful if they don't question my decisions." He quickly changed the topic and said with emotion, "Thankfully, the old immortal is coincidentally visiting our prefecture at the moment. He observed the night sky yesterday, and he discovered the Yin energy permeating the prefectural city from above. Otherwise, we would most certainly still be clueless. And once those demons took us by surprise, the outcome would have simply been unimaginable. Absolutely unimaginable." Was the dangling copper tower similar to the beacon towers on the borders? Was it able to call for help from nearby immortal forces? Xianxia asked. The armored general nodded with a gloomy expression and replied, "That's exactly right. However, those demons were extremely cunning and vicious, and they targeted the dangling copper tower and caused our prefectural city to lose contact with the spiritual horn 2 force that's located 450 kilometers away. The dangling copper tower could actually utilize mystical powers to send messages. It would have taken no longer than 15 minutes to inform the spiritual horn force about our situation. Right now, we have no option but to use flying swords to deliver the message now. TSK, the speed of flying swords is not bad, but they're truly expensive." The armored general shot another sideways glance at Taoist Chong Miao, who looked extremely pleased with himself. The Taoist priest truly looked as punchable as could be. He had actually charged them 100,000 taels of silver for the most ordinary flying sword. Did the Taoist priest genuinely believe that they were unaware of the situation of relay stations in the mountains? Not to mention, it was very likely that he had privately charged Prefectural Overseer Lu a huge sum for the 2 copper-armored warriors as well. The armored general was General Ma's subordinate, and they had fought alongside each other on the borders for many years. Even though he had never been a big fan of Prefectural Overseer Lu, in his opinion a bookworm, his impression of this official had become much better these past 2 days. Not only had the Prefectural Overseer not hidden under his bed in fear like the average official, but he was actually running around and doing his best to control the situation. On the contrary, he had a terrible impression of the old Taoist priest who was taking advantage of the dire situation for his own selfish gains. He was a heretical Taoist priest who was also based in Blusher Prefecture, so what right did he have to extort the others? If the prefectural city was destroyed, then what would Chong Miao do even if he managed to escape? So what if he decided to abandon his family, disciples, and ancestral inheritance? Was he not afraid of having nothing but bare walls in his house in the future? Dare I ask, Prefectural Overseer Lu, when the esteemed immortals from the spiritual horn force will arrive at Blusher Prefecture? Approximately how many people will come? Xianxia asked. The Prefectural Overseer smiled and replied, "Fortunately, the spiritual horn force has a 1,000-year-old colored Luan 3. It was once the steed of the spiritual horn force's founding master, and after the master passed, the colored Luan has never left the mountains again. The force masters after that have also been able to ask the colored Luan for help, and the colored Luan can carry 5 to 6 people on its back and fly over. Assuming that nothing goes wrong, I believe that the cultivators from the spiritual horn force should arrive by noon tomorrow." Prefectural Overseer Lu sighed before suddenly raising his voice and urging, "So, I need everyone's help in defending the prefectural city until the esteemed immortals from the spiritual horn force arrive. We need to at least hold on until noon tomorrow." Xianxia and Zhang Shanfeng exchanged a glance. They both had slightly anxious expressions. Zhang Shanfeng was more worried about Chun Ping'an's trip to the city god pavilion. Would he encounter any dangers there? There were towering city walls running along the east gate of Blusher Prefecture, and there was a guard station, a 2-floor building with a 3-layer hip and gable roof. General Ma's armor was not new and shiny as befitting of a parade suit. Instead, it was riddled with gashes from swords and sabers. However, it was clear that the general from Colorful Garment Nation liked this suit of armor very much. There hadn't been many battles on the borders of Colorful Garment Nation for the past century, and there had only been some occasional skirmishes with Ancient Elm Nation located to the north. Because of this, martial artists in the army all held military merit and achievements in very high regard. After all, these things were critical if one wanted to receive promotions in the army or officialdom. If it weren't for the fact that General Ma had no one speaking for him in the imperial court, he would have most likely become a powerful official in the Ministry of War long ago, even from a young age. As he stood atop the guard station, General Ma suddenly noticed the old immortal looking at the city god pavilion. The old immortal gazed in that direction for a long time, and General Ma thought that something unexpected had suddenly occurred again. Elder Huang, are the demons there causing trouble again? The old immortal with large and flowing sleeves stroked his beard and chuckled. There's nothing to worry about. I naturally have my ways of suppressing them. What we truly need to concentrate on is the Zhao clan residence in the middle of the city. This place is far too close to the prefectural office, so the consequences will be severe if anything untoward were to happen. Fortunately, I came across 2 very good friends while I was traveling south. They're both leaders in immortal forces from the mountains, and they had initially planned to travel to Lakeview Academy together to discuss the Tao with the scholars in the academy. However, the situation here is very serious, so I no longer have the freedom to consider whether this will delay their travels. I've already sent a message to the 2 of them and asked them to rush over to help Blusher Prefecture as quickly as possible. I believe they can fly on the wind and arrive here very soon. At that time, General Ma and I can guard the east gate, while one of my friends can keep an eye on the Zhao clan residence and guard the prefectural office at the same time. My other friend can go over to guard the west gate. In addition to us, there are also several cultivators and gallant individuals inside the prefectural office right now. I'm fairly sure that the troublemaking demons won't be able to erode the prefectural city. General Ma cupped his fists in gratitude and said, Elder Huang, if it weren't for you discovering the abnormalities and warning us in time, the residents in the prefectural city would have definitely suffered a catastrophe. Not only that, but you are even willing to step forward in the face of danger and provide us with help. I'm a crude barbarian, so it's hard for me to come up with eloquent words. However, I'll definitely remember your help. The old immortal smiled and said with a shake of his head, if cultivation on the mountains was for the sake of achieving individual transcendence while ignoring the suffering of others, then what's the point of cultivating to become an immortal? What's the point of achieving immortality? General Ma heavily thumped his chest plate with his fist, then raised his thumb and saying in sincerity, Elder Huang, just this remark alone proves that you're genuinely cultivating the Tao. An angry expression spread across the face of the middle-aged general, and he continued, as for some immortals in Colorful Garment Nation who only care about fame and fortune, especially those immortals in the capital, absolutely shameless. They stick their hands out and ask the imperial court for money every day, and they use this money to build immortal pagodas and tall towers, wasting manpower and money in the process. Sai, let's not talk about this. The more I talk about it, the angrier I get. The old immortal clasped his hands behind his back and said with a faint smile, which river in the world doesn't have soil and sand flow together with the water? General Ma, there's no need to be overly resentful about this. Since the world is, why don't you cultivate and perfect yourself first? General Ma nodded in sincere agreement. He felt increasing respect toward this old immortal. This man was truly a powerful immortal, and a real one at that, an immortal who had deep compassion for others. Immortals didn't come from only the blessed lands and immortal abodes in the mountains. They came from outside the mountains as well. The old immortal squinted his eyes and used his mystical powers to observe the city god pavilion again. However, he was too far away from the city god pavilion, so he was unable to see the situation very clearly. It would have been great if old Demon Me had been present. He had some ways to observe mountains and rivers through his palms, so he would have likely been able to observe the situation in the city god pavilion very clearly. After all, they were only a short distance away from the city god pavilion from the perspective of this mystical ability. Just now, Elder Huang had detected the seal formation around the city god hall being shattered. He was able to confirm its destruction, and it was definitely some naive person trying to play a hero. However, this didn't matter, as he had already prepared backup plans in the city god pavilion. Old Demon Me had secretly tampered with the 2 clay statues and the city god a long time ago. Not hesitating to pay a huge price, Old Demon Me had sacrificed 20 years of unique incense offerings to target the 3 deities, causing them to fall to demonic ways. Because of this, Old Demon Me had stubbornly asked Elder Huang and his 2 friends for 3 spirit tools. Only after receiving them did he stop nagging and get to work. In other words, the small ripples in the city god pavilion ultimately couldn't change the direction of the surging river. This was a scheme that the 4 parties had prepared in secret for 30 years, so how could they possibly fall at the final hurdle? This was unless a 10th-tier terrestrial immortal descended from the sky and suddenly proclaimed that they were going to protect the prefectural city of Blusher Prefecture. Only in that case would they perhaps back down. However, Elder Huang and the others had investigated and confirmed the attitudes of Divine Edict Sect, Lakeview Academy, and the other powerful immortal forces already. Thus, they were confident that no 10th-tier chi refiner would suddenly descend from the skies. Moreover, powerful beings at the nascent tier were always elusive and hard to find. To put it bluntly, unless they were a righteous nascent tier immortal from an upright force, it was difficult to say whether they would be willing to become involved in this matter. Their momentum was unstoppable, and their success was inevitable. The old immortal smiled in his mind. In reality, he felt a strong urge to turn around and pat the shoulder of the honest and simple-minded general. He wanted to smile and tease him. Little Ma, your judgment of others is quite poor.
Immortal.
If anything, by your standards, I'm a demonic and heretical cultivator. As for the immortals in the capital of Colorful Garment Nation that you speak of, 2 of the most famous ones are actually my direct disciples. Heretical and vagrant cultivators like them were just like thieving rats in the fields. They would remain idle for long periods at a time, but they would also make enough to live for years on end once they sprang into action. Once they successfully obtained that immortal treasure, they would simply go into seclusion for 20 or 30 years if worse came to worst. They would travel further south and secretly plan to steal even more valuable items. Afterward, they would be powerful and carefree immortals again. Perhaps one day, they might even become someone as powerful as that person in Middle-earth Divine Continent's White Emperor City. Even though everyone in the world knew he was a demonic cultivator, did anyone dare to call him a demon to his face? Even the large majority of upper 5-tier cultivators in the world didn't dare to do this. However, the old immortal could only daydream about these kinds of wonderful things. He was simply amusing himself. He glanced at the south and he turned around to look at the north. He was feeling slightly hesitant. It was definitely the safest option to flee to the south after they succeeded. If they fled to the north as agreed, they would need to face many more dangers in order to obtain the treasures and opportunities they desired. If they succeeded, however, they would definitely gain immense wealth. 1. Chong Miao Chong Mel literally means worshipping the wonderful. 2. Spiritual horn, literally Lingxi, actually, spirit rhinoceros, actually means mutual understanding. The source is a poem by Li Shangyin, a Tang dynasty poet and politician. Apparently the rhinoceros horn has perfect and even grain running all the way from root to tip, and Li Shangyin thought that it was a great metaphor for thoughts and feelings that perfectly cross the distance between people. 3. The luan is a kind of bird in Chinese mythology, loosely resembling a phoenix. 4. This means good and bad people or things being mixed together. According to the wishes of the young girl with the surname Fu, a group of people from Divine Edict Sect headed out to look for that illegal mountain god temple. However, the fortune of the mountains and rivers suddenly underwent a dramatic change halfway through their journey, and it gradually transformed from an impure and turbulent state into a pure and stable state. Zhao Qing, the old Taoist priest leading the group, was extremely astonished by this. He decided to continue to the illegal mountain god temple to check the situation. However, what he discovered was the shattered gold statue of the illegal mountain god. Mountain god Qin was already dead. They were pleasantly surprised to find some shards of the shattered gold statue among the ruins, and even Zhao Lu was deeply astounded by this. He carefully retrieved the shards of the gold statue and put them away. Even though he eventually had to turn them over to the sect, it was still a good feeling to caress and examine these shards from time to time. The old Taoist priest hesitated for a long time after returning to the small town, and he ultimately decided to visit the old residence by himself to repair his situation with Yang Huang. Yang Huang and his wife had the support of senior Aunt Fu now, so they no longer needed to worry about Divine Edict Sect causing trouble for them in the future. Moreover, not only was the formation around the old residence still intact, but they also had the chance to further their cultivation as well. With Yang Huang's impressive talent, perhaps he would have the opportunity to become a middle 5-tier cultivator in the future. This was especially the case now that his wife, the ghostly tree spirit, was no longer a burden on him. Zhao Lu could perfectly envision the future. For example, Yang Huang wasn't a pedantic and stubborn person, and he had cultivated extremely good relationships with others in Divine Edict sect back while he was still cultivating there. Thus, with a bit of effort, it was entirely possible that Yang Huang or his wife could be appointed as a formal mountain god by the imperial court. If it were the latter who succeeded, then things would truly become quite terrifying. If both husband and wife were at the abode tier, who wouldn't want to build a good relationship with them? In fact, even Divine Edict sect would very likely go with the flow and show goodwill toward them. And what would happen to him, Zhao Lu, at that time? When that time came, even kowtowing and begging Yang Huang and his wife for forgiveness wouldn't work. As such, he was better off bowing his head and actively expressing goodwill toward them now. Zhao Lu made up his mind, so he no longer paced around in hesitation. He directly visited the old estate and congratulated the husband and wife on their good fortune. He apologized to them at the same time, and he drank 3 cups of wine as punishment. He also gave them a low-grade but very likable spirit tool. Yang Huang was also a remarkable person, and was extremely polite and friendly toward the apologizing Zhao Lu even though they had just been engaged in a serious conflict not long ago. He started to drink with Zhao Lu, and he even accepted the small spirit tool. However, after Yang Huang became slightly drunk, he started to loudly scold and criticize Zhao Lu. In the end, even his ghostly wife was unable to watch on. She persuaded him to stop, but Yang Huang insisted on continuing no matter what. Zhao Lu sat there and didn't say anything at all. He simply endured Yang Huang's criticisms. Afterward, Zhao Lu stayed in the old estate and sent a message to the other disciples of Divine Edict sect who were staying in the small town. The disciples could only stay in the small town for another day. Things were harmonious and peaceful. When Zhao Lu left, he knew that Yang Huang had done everything for show only. Yang Huang would only look down on him even more. Indeed, Yang Huang was the type of smart person who would prefer to criticize noble people rather than provoke scheming evildoers. However, Zhao Lu was still satisfied with his trip. He was content that their relationship had been mended. They were far from being friends, and Zhao Lu didn't need to dream about becoming friends with Yang Huang in his lifetime. However, they would no longer be enemies either. If he put in a bit of effort and cultivated this relationship well, traveling to Blusher Prefecture from time to time, perhaps he would have an opportunity to become acquaintances with Yang Huang in the future. There were complicated emotions in Zhao Lu's mind as he returned north with the group of disciples from Divine Edict sect. However, he quickly discovered something abnormal about Blusher Prefecture after traveling a few dozen kilometers. Even so, the old immortal from Divine Edict sect still remained silent. That night, they camped in the open on a mountain peak. The young 3rd-tier sword cultivator found the old Taoist priest standing in front of the cliff, and he quietly asked, "Master, there's clearly demonic energy permeating through Blusher Prefecture. It's quite abundant and vigorous, and this is definitely the doing of powerful demons since they dare to act so openly and wantonly. Should we rush over to check the situation?" Zhao Lu chuckled and replied, "Even you're able to see the soaring demonic energy, so how can I not? Your master isn't blind." The young sword cultivator carefully ruminated on the words of his master. "Then should we use a flying sword to inform our sect? Should we ask for reinforcements?" he asked in a hesitant voice. The old man squinted his eyes and peered at the night sky above the prefectural city of Blusher Prefecture. "Senior Aunt Fu ordered us to suppress the illegal mountain god, but the mountain god temple has already collapsed, and we've also retrieved 3 shards of his gold statue. In addition to this, you guys have also reaped many benefits and gained many advantages over your peers from this trip outside the mountains. How many chi refiners at the lower 5 tiers have seen the shards of a mountain or river god's gold statue before? We can definitely obtain a grading of high for our trip this time. If we're fortunate, we might even obtain a grading of very high." Zhao Lu turned around and continued in a soft voice. "Sheeping, you need to understand that doing too many good things can sometimes be a bad thing. If we decide to deliver a message using a flying sword, our sect will very possibly discover our decision to shirk from battle once they send people to Colorful Garment Nation to investigate this matter and match up the timelines. Master is only willing to tell the truth and say these things to you because you're my most prized disciple. Remember not to say this to anyone else." The young sword cultivator was wholeheartedly convinced, and he lowered his voice and said, "Master is the wisest and most magnificent. Master always has the most comprehensive plans." Zhao Lu turned around to glance at the campfire in the distance. The 3 other disciples from Divine Edict sect were sitting cross-legged while sleeping, and there were indistinct wisps of mist hovering around the ears and nose of the youngest disciple as he breathed. The aura of the siblings who had entered the sect earlier than him was far inferior. The old man furrowed his brows and said in a low voice, "We need to discuss this matter with that little kid as well. He has extremely keen senses, so don't be fooled by his facade of naivety. We can trick that brother and sister, but we won't be able to trick him. If we don't clear things up with him, there'll be big trouble for us if he goes around talking about this once we return." The young sword cultivator nodded in understanding. Zhao Lu turned around to look at his direct disciple with a pleased smile, and he continued in a gentle manner, "Sheeping, it won't be easy to seal that mischievous child's mouth. Didn't you secretly take a shard of the gold statue? This is against the rules to begin with, and the sect will definitely punish you severely if they find out. Here, hand it over and I will help you give it to that little kid. Let's see if he dares to accept this hot potato. If he does, then you and I will be partners in crime in the future. We'll be able to look out for each other once we return to the mountain. In a sense, I am also paving a path for you. If he doesn't accept it, however, Master is the leader of this group, so I'm naturally responsible for judging everyone's performance. I need to write up a document for the external department once we return, so I can act within the rules to deal with the backer of this little kid. No one will be able to find any problems." The old man extended his open hand toward the young sword cultivator. "Come on, hand it over." An angry expression instantly spread across the young sword cultivator's face. However, he quickly squeezed out a smile, and he didn't try to hide anything as he retrieved a large shard of the gold statue and handed it to the old Taoist priest. There was no hint of unwillingness on his face. Zhao Lu accepted the golden shard and chuckled, "Oh, it's quite big. This one piece is the size of 2 pieces. By the looks of it, your luck is quite good. You managed to reap such a huge benefit." There was a stiff expression on Sheeping's face, and he forced a smile and replied, "After returning to the sect, I initially wanted to give it to you for your birthday next month, Master. Thank you for the thought," Zhao Lu said as he patted the young sword cultivator's shoulder. Afterward, the young sword cultivator silently returned to the campfire and sat down cross-legged. He closed his eyes, and a faint smile remained on his face the entire time. The old Taoist priest sat down in front of the cliff by himself. He practiced breathing techniques and refined qi, and he remained silent for a long moment before suddenly ridiculing himself in a soft voice. "The great Tao is beyond my grasp, so I can only come up with some small schemes. Ha! How pitiful." The young scholar Lu Qiqing left the prefectural city from the east gate. After walking along the official road for 5 kilometers, he stopped at the relay station to rest for a while. Commoners with no scholarly merit definitely couldn't enter such relay stations to rest. There was a tea stall outside the relay station, and Lu Qiqing asked for a bowl of piping hot tea. This warmed up his stomach, and he softly murmured as if he were talking to himself, "Don't you always brag about how powerful you are? Are you truly going to ignore this dire situation? Young Mistress Lu is a really good girl. Not only did she give me money to spend, but she didn't hesitate at all when giving it to me. Moreover, she let me hug her and caress her too. She solved one of my biggest issues regarding money. Otherwise, did you really want me to beg or sell my ass? If I starve to death, you won't be any better off. Ha! Isn't it your great misfortune to come across a master like me? Why don't you mention how you arrived here? It was thanks to me entering the abandoned tomb by accident and shattering that 1,000-year-old formation. It was because of this that you were rescued from the prison and allowed to see the light of day again. Do you know? Because of your existence, I don't dare to unleash my full power when playing around with women now. I only dare to touch their hands and kiss them. Otherwise, won't I be benefiting you, a dirty old man? Immortal my ass. You're always hiding like a homeless dog, and you didn't dare to show yourself even when I was knocked to the ground with a single punch. And you call yourself an immortal above the unpolished jade tier or whatnot. Then I'm a golden core tier immortal as well. I've heard that only golden core tier immortals are genuine immortals. When they're bored, they can fly through the sky every day. When they feel like it, they can descend to the ground to drink some wine. Even emperors and officials have to treat them with utmost respect. The owner of the tea stall was filled with worry as he looked at the impoverished scholar sitting in the distance. This young scholar wasn't a retard, was he? Was he mumbling and speaking to himself? It didn't matter if he was a retard, but it would definitely matter if he didn't have any money. Lu Qiqing widened his eyes and exclaimed, "What? The golden courtier is nothing but shit? Do you believe me when I say that I'll fart you out after finishing my bowl of tea, and then we'll each go our separate way in the future? It's not good to expose people's shortcomings when arguing with them. So what if I'm an illegitimate son? Even if I had no parents to raise me, I'm still better off than you, an old freak. You're already so old, yet you still insist on wearing that pink Taoist robe. TSK, 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 how utterly shameless. Why don't you beg me to buy some makeup for you? Fuck. Not again." The young scholar's voice had already been quiet to begin with, and it eventually became so quiet that even he couldn't hear himself. His eyes gradually lost focus and became murky, but they instantly became intense and full of spirit the next moment. It was as if a deity had possessed him, and his aura became completely different from before. He no longer appeared like an impoverished scholar, and he instead appeared like an emperor in disguise. There was a wide smile on Lu Qiqing's face as he extended his hand and shakily lifted the bowl to finish the last mouthful of tea. He stood up and tossed a handful of copper coins on the table before striding away. His footsteps were slightly shaky and unstable at the start, and it was as if he had just drunk a bowl of wine instead of a bowl of tea. There was also a slightly intoxicated expression in his eyes. However, his footsteps became increasingly stable and firm as he walked, and the young scholar eventually left the official road and entered a field that was filled with blooming rapeseed flowers. There was no one around, and he shrugged and caused the rope of his bag to automatically undo itself. The bag slid off his back and hovered in midair. At the same time, a beautiful and exquisite Taoist robe floated out from the bag. Sure enough, it was pink. The young scholar's robe automatically undid itself and slid off his body, switching with the pink Taoist robe. It then obediently folded itself and flew inside the bag. Apart from the exquisite pink Taoist robe that didn't adhere to the rules of this world, there was also a golden hairpin in the bag that slowly hovered up and slid through his hair. The bag then disappeared in a flash. It was clear that it had entered some pocket treasure. Of course, it was also possible that it had entered a minimization treasure, or perhaps a legendary container treasure, which were referred to as mystical small worlds. The young scholar spread his arms and gazed up at the sky. There was an intoxicated smile on his face, and his pink Taoist robe surprisingly appeared alive and excited as it suddenly opened up with a flutter and hovered to his back. As if there were a maidservant helping him, the pink Taoist robe automatically slid itself onto his body. Lu Qiqing had already been handsome to begin with, and he actually appeared even more handsome after putting on this robe. The carefree and elegant scholar strode forward through the air. He was carried by the wind, and he ascended higher and higher as he walked, all the way until he entered the clouds. 1,000 years in the tomb, 1,000 years also in the world, he sang loudly. Rapeseed flowers from another world bloomed on the ground under his feet.